Hi, everyone. How many of you guys were here when we did that Q&A? Okay, if you guys still want to talk about slavery, Grant has better answers than I do. I just listened to him give this presentation to the high schoolers, and it was like 100 times better than mine, and I was like, dang it, I should have sent him instead. But I didn't, so it's okay.
Send me for what?
Send you for the answers on slavery in the Old Testament.
Send me for sleep.
You're such an idiot. Well, I won't do like a huge recap because you guys then all probably remember that I was on staff with Ratio forever ago. Yeah, cool. So this is kind of my bread and butter. So I was certainly confident, if not always right, certainly confident in the Q&A, but this is really where I like to camp out in conversation. This is something that is very important to me. I didn't always hold a pro-life position. I was I don't know. I was in Christian community my whole life, but as a teenager, I heard a lot of the My Body, My Choice was still really popular then. I was like, yeah, okay, that sounds nice. Like, I can be down with that. But then I got to college, and actually my first encounter with Aaron Marshall, who started this chapter, was watching him have a conversation with a female student on campus while we were having the GAP project, which is the Genocide Awareness Project, in which they have pictures of aborted fetuses. And it was intense. But listening to him for that hour that I watched him, I was like, oh, he clearly knows so much more about this than I do. And that's when I got really interested in this, and this is when I learned a lot of what I know now. I did a debate on Teal TV for this as a student. I think I was a sophomore. And they took the debate down off of YouTube, and it was the
most viewed program they had on Teal TV.
It was the most viewed. And even people who were vehemently pro-choice were all resoundingly that we did better than the pro-choice opposition that we had from the Feminist Student Alliance, because we came in with a lot of data. And I don't think that the Feminist Student Alliance expected it to go like that. So they just were kind of there. And so it was kind of odd. It was clearly unfairly balanced. And then the moderator actually got involved and got fired because he argued with us as a moderator and then got fired from the TV show. So that was crazy. And then I was able to and honored to actually, in the height of what I would consider my Ratio ministry career, I was the moderator for the Mike Adams debate that we had in 2018, I can't remember. And we packed it out so quickly. We had 700 people in the auditorium. We had another 300 who were sitting out watching it on laptops because it was so crowded. That's when we had, like I said, Dr. Mike Adams and Dr. Willie Parker, who is an abortion provider who does it, in his words, as a Christian service to women. He's an award winner from Planned Parenthood. Fascinating. So I got to moderate that. That was really cool. So like I said, super interested in this. Today, I'm going to be making a case for you guys on the philosophical and moral pro-life position. My goal tonight, I know most of you probably say you're a Christian, and I'm assuming that's usually the intent of this group, but this is not a Christian argument in the sense of you can make this argument without identifying as a Christian. What I'm going to be pulling from is just philosophy and science. Now, if you're a Christian, you can actually undergird this better, but we don't have to get there tonight. But this is not an inherently Christian argument on its base. You don't have to be a Christian to agree with this argument. Okay, so we're going to have to, like good apologists, we're going to have to answer two questions, right, and define our terms so that we know what we're talking about and we don't get off track, which is really hard to do in these kinds of conversations because they get very emotionally intense. They tend to have a lot of pigeonholes, rabbit trails. It's very hard to stay on topic. So we want to be careful going through this argument systematically tonight of defining our terms and making a clear progression of argumentation, okay? So the first question that we're going to answer is, what is abortion, okay? And then we're going to answer the question of what are the unborn, and those are two separate questions. And so somewhere in the next two slides, I have a graphic picture of abortion. So I just want to let you know if that's something that you're sensitive to, that's absolutely normal and appropriate. Feel free to put your head down or turn around. I will let you know when it's gone. Okay, cool. I have one more slide. Okay, so we're actually just going to define the term abortion first. So we're going to start with our most reputable source that you could ever imagine, Wikipedia.
You can see your next slides on the screen if you do want to.
I don't see it. I just see the one I'm on. I don't care. I've done this so many times, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay. Abortion is the ending of a pregnancy by removal or expulsion of the embryo or fetus. If you go to medlineplus.gov, which is a little bit better, right, because it's a .gov, Abortion is a procedure to end a pregnancy. It uses medicine or surgery to remove the embryo or fetus and placenta from the uterus. And then harvardhealth.edu, also good edu, is the removal of pregnancy tissue, products of conception, or the fetus and placenta after birth from the uterus. What are your initial impressions of these definitions? Where's the word baby? Okay, right. So the word baby isn't used. What's the word that's consistently used in all of them? Fetus. Okay, how many of you guys feel like fetus is a degradation or derogatory term? It's not. So take that power back, ladies and gentlemen. Fetus is Latin for baby. So they're saying baby in another language. Now, when people usually use the term fetus, what are they trying to do? Potentially dehumanize. Now, maybe they're trying to be medical, and because in a medical setting they would say fetus, right? So we could give the benefit of the doubt of grace there. That would be a medical term. But maybe they're trying to degrade. Well, great. Fetus means baby in Latin. So we know what it is. We all agree on what it is. It's a fetus, it's a baby. Those are interchangeable terms. If your opposition is more comfortable with the word fetus, we can call it a fetus. That's fine. Okay? Now, what else do you notice? Anything else? What?
The last one was just the word pregnancy tissue.
Right. Why is that? Why do you bring that up?
I mean, it's not even human.
Right. Okay, so tissue. So
Not alive, not even human.
So that's actually what I was going to get at. It's like you knew. Pregnancy tissue and products of conception. Do you guys see how that's even like a step away from fetus? It's like a dissociation from that. It's like a second step removed. Products of conception, right? Tissues. Your tissues. You guys are walking tissue boxes, like in some sense, right? You guys are walking tissue, muscle, brain machines. Okay. It's very odd to me that probably the most clear and concise definition is which one? Wikipedia, yeah, literally. It's very clear. It is the ending of a pregnancy by the removal or expulsion of an embryo or fetus. That's what it's doing. That's the job. So if you want to define an abortion, what is a successful abortion? It's when you come in with a fetus and you leave without a fetus inside of the body. Okay? It's the ending of a pregnancy. You're going to now see it. If you're uncomfortable, please put your head down. All right, we're going to talk about gestation of abortion. Okay? Some of these stats are a little old, so forgive me for that. One of the great parts about being a mother of three is you don't have time to work on PowerPoints anymore. All right, so let's talk about first trimester abortions. You're going to see one right here. This is in comparison to a coin, so you kind of get an idea of how small. This video we don't have time to watch, but I would love for you guys to write it down and watch it later. If you haven't already, I'm assuming some of you probably are very familiar with Lila Rose, who does live action. I'm going to. So you can find this from Live Action. That's Lila Rose. She's Catholic and she's a pro-life advocate. She's a really popular. She might be the most popular one, so you might have heard of her already. This man right here, his name is Anthony Levantino. I'm not sure I'm going to spell that right. Dr. Anthony Levantino, he's an abortion provider. He provided thousands of abortions before changing his mind on his position on abortion, so he's performed them at all gestations. And he, in this video, just explains how you perform abortions at different gestations. It's very, medically informative, but I will be very, clear on the front end of, you're going to find loaded language when you're talking about abortion in either direction. So when you're talking about loaded language on his side, he's going to use the terms baby to try and give that emotional response, right? This is a baby that we're doing this to. You might find that in the other camp who will say products of conception and pregnancy tissue. That's loaded language in the other direction, trying to dehumanize even a step further from fetus. So anyway, I would strongly recommend watching this video. It's very informative, especially, and I know it's not probably the case tonight, but I usually give this argument with pro-choice people in the room. And I feel very strongly that if you're pro-choice and you're in here with me, I want you to leave a really well-informed pro-choice advocate. So you need to know what it is that you are defending or in agreement with. And when they ended the slave trade, one of the biggest things that did that really was pictures of the slave ships, because people who could kind of like hold the idea of slavery out here when they were like forced to like look at the ships and the layout of human bodies going across the sea, they couldn't really stomach it the same way, because they're like, now I really understand what it is that I'm advocating for. And so all of that to be said, if you are pro-choice, you need to be like really aware of what like pro-choice choice to do what, to have an abortion. Okay, well, what does an abortion look like? Okay, so let's break them down. First trimester abortion is up to 13 weeks. How many of you guys have ever had a baby? Yeah, I didn't think so, right? I know. So, okay. So one of the things that I didn't know until I had babies was anything about gestations. Like, I knew nothing about all of that, okay? So does anybody know when the heartbeat starts?
Isn't it around 6 weeks?
5 to 6 weeks. You're exactly right. All right. So how many of you guys are super aware of, like, your cycle? Like luteal, follicular, those words ring bells, right? I'm seeing some snickering faces. Right, okay. So women go through, what, like a 30-day, give or take, cycle, right? They have, like, a couple days in that window of 30 where they could get pregnant, right, because they're ovulating, okay? You ovulate, you consummate, you baby make, there's now a baby in there, okay? You're not going to know that you've missed your period for how long? 2 or so weeks. You got about 2 weeks, okay? Another extra week if the whole week goes by and you're like, where was that period? So you're talking about 2 weeks to 3 weeks. That's about average time to find out early that you're pregnant. Now, if you're like me and you got really nauseous but then took a bunch of negative pregnancy tests with your second, I didn't know until I was 8 weeks pregnant that I was actually pregnant, okay? So well beyond what's already happened. Heartbeat. Well beyond the heartbeat, okay? So most women are finding out they're pregnant very close to when or after the heartbeat starts, okay? That's one thing to understand, okay? So when you're doing a first trimester abortion, what you're talking about is a woman who finds out she's pregnant. It's already 2 weeks after she's had the baby, unless the woman has had a sexual encounter in which she feels that there's a possibility in which she would take something called the morning after pill. You guys familiar with morning after pill? Right? Okay. The proper name is RU486. That's what that is. Does anybody know what the morning after pill does? It sheds the lining of your uterus. It forces that shed. So when you have your period, what's happening? Your uterine lining is shedding, right? And you bleed, okay? So this forces that to happen. And if something has implanted, it can't stay, right? Because it gets shed, okay? So that's what happens when you take RU486. Women will do it precautionarily. If they have a sexual encounter and they think they could be pregnant, they'll go get the morning after pill. You can get it for like $50, I think, at like CVS. I don't even think you have to, I know you don't have to have a prescription, but I think you can just like grab it and go. It's really easy to get. You can also have it mailed to you if you want to have it secretly. That's something I learned recently. If you are more than, I think, like 5 or 6 weeks, I believe, you can't effectively take the morning after pill at a high enough dosage to ensure that the abortion is going to be successful. So what you're going to do, from 5 to 13 weeks is you're actually going to have to go in to a Planned Parenthood of sorts, and they're going to do what's called a DNC, which is a dilation and curettage, which is exactly how it sounds. They're going to dilate you, and then you're going to curettage. So they're going to take a suction tool. It's about yay big, and they're going to suction out the fetus and whatever else is in there. And that is the most common form of abortion. Can anybody guess why that's the most common form of abortion? Just timing-wise.
You're not going to spend months deciding whether or not you want the baby.
Yeah, right. So you've probably found out, but you've probably found out too late if you haven't just precautionarily taken the morning after pill. You're finding out somewhere in that 3 weeks. And has anybody ever made an appointment with a doctor and been in the next day? No, not usually, right? So you're talking about a week while you're figuring all of this out, right? So you're talking about most women are getting into that 5-week window before they're really starting to figure out what to do. And by that point, you're going to go in and you're going to have a DNC, which is a suction procedure. Okay, Second trimester abortions after 13 weeks, that's what you're seeing both here and here, which is fascinating that it can encompass such a change in growth, because this one is still very small, but this one you can tell looks just like sort of like a preemie, like a small version of a preemie. Okay, how they do a second trimester abortion is a little more involved. So what they're going to do is they're going to take you into a Planned Parenthood and they're going to perform a surgical D&E, which is called a dilation and evacuation. And because the fetus is too large to be suctioned out with a suction tool, they're going to dilate you and they're going to insert, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of helpful if you can see it. Yeah, okay, that's so much better. Do you see these forceps that he's holding? Kind of like this, that clamp. You can kind of see what he's holding. Think like grill tongs, but medical, okay? So he's going to dilate you. He's going to insert, he's going to dilate with this speculum for women who are familiar with having your annuals. And then right here, those are the toothed parts of the gripping tool. And he's literally going to go in and he's going to pull. And the way that they know that they've been successful is they do actually piece the fetus back together, arm, leg. So they know, they usually know they got the head because the white matter oozes out. That's the brain matter. That's like a whole thing. So you just learn tricks as an abortion provider of like how to know you've gotten certain things. You just piece back until you know everything's out, because if everything's not out, then you're running that woman a huge risk of like sepsis, infection, etc., because now she's got like leftover pieces of tissue that don't belong in her body anymore, alone, solo. And so that's again called a dilation and evacuation. That's an outpatient procedure. They'll do that and then they'll send you home. I have a woman I heard in an interview one time who used to work at a Planned Parenthood, and she said the worst room that she's ever been in her life is an outpatient of like a D&E. She's like, they just seem dead inside. There's just something about the women, and I think it's because they're post-op, they're probably medicated to some degree, and there's just like darkness, which I will, as a Christian, say there's a spiritual part of that, but whatever. If you're not a Christian, that's fine. That's a second trimester. Third trimester, after 24 weeks, I do want to go ahead and put the cards on the table. This is a very uncommon abortion. These are very rare. That is a true statement. Do I think that they're underreported and misreported? 100%. I think it is very easy and very common for abortion providers to underrepresent the true numbers of third trimester abortions because they are kind of poo-pooed upon even by pro-choice supporters. Like you saw the girl who said after 24 weeks. Okay, because we all kind of know how big they are by 24 weeks. So for context, in the second trimester, does anybody know when you find out the gender of your baby?
Okay, it was 20, but it's earlier.
It's 18 now.
Yeah.
18 to 20. 18 weeks, you get to find out the gender of your baby. That's when I found out I was having a boy and a girl. It's the coolest days of my life.
Is that because ultrasound is improved, or is that like a blood test?
You could do a blood test at like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And have the gender. But most people don't do that. They wait until the ultrasound. But so for context, you could have a woman who's coming in to have an ultrasound to find out the gender of a fetus while the other person's going to have the fetus dismembered. It's a really odd like reality that we live in where those can happen simultaneously at the same week gestation. All right, so then third trimester after 24 weeks, like I said, really rare. The thing about this one that is so brutal that I don't think people really think about is the process is birth. So let me explain that. So I was induced to have my child, which means I was given something called Pitocin. Thank you. I was given Pitocin to speed it up, okay, which helped me because I needed it. And then, I had my epidural and I had my baby, and it was healthy and it was great. Not everyone's jam, but it worked for us. So when you go in for your abortion, what they're going to do is they're going to inject a large needle into your stomach.
Just a comment on the Pitocin. Pitocin is not scary.
It's not.
Pitocin is just a synthetic version of oxytocin.
Yes.
What your body makes anyway.
Yes. So if you're like pregnant and like it happens to you, don't panic. Yeah. Okay. So if you're having an abortion in the third trimester, you're going to come in, they're going to inject through the stomach, and they're going to inject a medication that is normally used to restart adult hearts that have stopped. and they're going to inject it into the head or the heart of the fetus, and they're going to do it with a heart monitor on the fetus, and they're going to inject, and they're going to wait for the heartbeat to stop, and that's how they know that they were successful. But then you have to go home with the no longer alive fetus inside of you because it takes some time to get the fetus out, and the fetus is too big for a D&E. So that what they're going to do is they're going to send you home, or they're going to keep you and they're going to put you on Pitocin or something like that, which is going to stimulate to your body that you should be going through contractions. That's what Pitocin does. It tells your body it's time to start contracting. And then you're going to come in, or if you're in, you stay in, but you're going to come back in if you leave, and you're going to have a stillbirth. So you're going to still go through the birthing experience. You're just going to be giving birth to a fetus that's no longer alive. If it doesn't come out all the way correctly, they will finish with a D&E, but they don't do those unless something happens with the stillbirth. So, all right, so again, if you are pro-choice, I'll say right now, that's fine to a degree as long as you're still totally okay with like, yes, I affirm that these practices are something that I believe that people have the right to, and then we can move from there about is that moral and ethical to hold that position. But now we're all much more familiar with what abortions look like. Now again, the most common one is a suction aspiration, a DNC, which happens between 5 and 13 weeks, and more commonly closer to the 5 to 8 week mark. So right around that heartbeat start. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about state abortion bans. This is old material, this is 2020, so this might have changed a little bit, but for us at that time, our gestational age of abortion ban was at viability. So does anybody know what the word viability means?
The age the baby could survive outside the uterus.
Exactly, the age that the fetus could survive outside of the womb overlaps with our right to an abortion in North Carolina. Let's see, Georgia was 6 weeks post-viability. Oh yeah, it was a ban post-viability, which is fascinating. Okay, anyway, we're not gonna do those right now. Okay, so here's what's fascinating, right? So viability, like you said, the ability to live or successfully survive with extreme NICU care, right? So we're not just taking this child home, right? This child's gonna be in NICU for a long time. You're talking underdeveloped lungs, you're talking a lot of things, okay? But could survive with the kind of interventions that we have today without being inside of the uterus anymore. Okay, but that has changed. So let's look a little bit for a second. We've got a kid named James. He's 5 years old now, so he's probably like 10 now. He was born at 23 weeks as what's considered a micro-preemie, and he survived. If we look at the numbers, between 50 and 66% of babies can survive at 23 weeks. For a mother who wants the fetus, I can assure you that you would take those odds. If for whatever reason you were having a micro-preemie, you'd be like, give me those odds, I will try, okay? At 24 weeks, it's even higher at 66 to 80. That's a really good percentage chance of survival at very early, because again, 24 weeks is very early. You're having babies what's considered healthy from 36 weeks on. That's like when they're not concerned anymore, after 36 weeks. So you're talking 12 weeks prior to that. A lot happens in 12 weeks. Even more so, we now have, from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which a lot of pro-choice people will poo-poo them, but whatever. Recent studies reveal that with active treatment, infants born at 22 weeks gestation can be a 25 to 50% survival rate. However, most hospitals at this point won't provide those measures because of the arbitrary cutoff of like, there's just like such little chance, like they won't try, which is really horrible. But it's fascinating, right, for us to look at the fact that our gestational overlap between viability and abortion legality in North Carolina is wild. Okay, so that's abortion. Like I said, most were performed at or under 8 weeks. 30% of or 27% of those are non-surgical. Almost 60% were surgical at or below 13 weeks, which is what I showed you earlier. And then lastly, I just kind of want to hit on this. Women in their 20s accounted for more than half of the abortions in between 25 to 29 years. Was the highest percentage of abortions. Does anybody want to take a stab at why they think that is? So that's post-college. 25 to 29 is most likely out. That's okay, yeah. Most likely out of college, which is surprising, right? Because you would think college, right? So interestingly, the numbers that I have seen show that people are actually more sexually active after college than they are in college. And you're talking about people here who are being established in their like professional life, who might be getting married or with long-term partners, or just happen to be more active in general sexually, and maybe, get themselves in a situation now, because remember, we think about pro-choice rhetoric. I wasn't financially ready, right? My circumstances weren't good. I've actually seen a lot of people who get abortions after they have a kid because they got pregnant again right away, and they're like, well, I can't handle two. I've seen that quite a bit. So this is that time frame where your fertility is wide open for women and your sexual activity is very much increased. So I think that that's pretty interesting, but just like a tidbit for you to know. All right. One of the coolest things, though, is actually when it comes to abortion, it's still terrifyingly awful and high rates, but it's going down, which is really cool. So I am really grateful for that. It is going down. Whether that's because people are protecting, I don't know exactly what's affecting that number for it to be going down. I'm not entirely sure. We can have conversations about, preventative measures before you get to the morning after pill, like later. Okay. We'll talk about birth control if you guys want to ask about that later too. We can talk about it. All right. So the next question we're answering, do you guys feel like we've adequately answered what abortion is? Like we could explain abortion and maybe remember some of the gestational differences, right? That earlier one is the D and C, later is D and E. So C is suck, E is grab. The last one is literally just inducing a stillbirth. Okay. So what are the unborn? That's what we have to define next, because the argument lives or dies truly on what the unborn is. Because if the unborn is not a human with human rights, it doesn't matter, right? Like if we can prove tonight that the fetus is the same as a skin tag or like a tumor, then there's no problem, right? We should not be restricting access to abortion ever, because it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's what we have to be asking is like, what is the unborn? Because what we do to them lives or dies on what it is they are, okay? So according to the American College of Pediatricians, in one of their medical journals, they say, the predominance of human biological research confirms that human life begins at conception, which is fertilization, so when the sperm and egg meet and they create that zygote with its own separate DNA, which one of our Worldview Wednesday kids talked about, which was awesome. At fertilization, the human being emerges as a whole, genetically distinct, individuated, zygotic living human organism. Zygotic living human organism, okay? It is a member of the species Homo sapien, so it's not like a banana and then it becomes a person. It's not like a cancer and then it becomes human. It doesn't work that way, okay? It is of the species from the moment of conception of the species Homo sapien. The only thing it needs is proper environment in order to grow and develop. Time and proper environment. That's all it needs. It needs an incubator and it needs some time. Okay? The difference between the individual, this is really important, and this is where the philosophy kind of kicks in here, okay? The difference between the individual in its Tom stage, its adult stage, and in its zygotic stage, little tiny zygote inside of a woman, is one of form and not nature. Well, what does that mean? That's really important, okay? It is the case that things have essences. They have whatness about them, okay? Human beings have humanness. It's their essence. It's your essential nature, okay? You have a nature that does not change, okay? Your nature is what it is, always and forever. From the moment you are conceived until you get into eternity, you have a nature, okay? But what changes constantly is your form, okay? Even when you move, your form is changing because little skin cells have fallen off of your face, or you lost a hair, right? Or you're getting older every second, right? So we can take it like from big stages of like you were a baby and then you were a teenager and now you're an adult, but like every second your form is changing, okay? That will always be true. It just seems more obvious when you're looking at a fetus to an adult. But you are changing every second in your form. You are never changing in your nature. Now, here's where this gets interesting. They make a really interesting philosophical statement that they have to know is a philosophical statement. And then to cover their butts, here's what they say. This statement focuses on the scientific evidence of when an individual human life begins. What are they trying to say here? Scientifically, life begins at conception, but we're not going to make a philosophical case, because if we do that, we're going to be in the realm of law and legislation and all of this, okay? Same thing if you look at any human embryology textbook you have at any medical school, they're going to say the same thing. We begin our description of the developing human with the formation and differentiation of the male and female sex cells or gametes, right? The sperm and the egg come together, which unite to initiate the embryonic development of a new individual, okay? That has its own nature. All right, so here's a really fascinating article. This was written by Dr. Kondik, a little bit about her. She is a professor of neurobiology and adjunct professor of pediatrics at the University of Utah School of Medicine. She is also director of human embryology instruction for the medical school and of the human neuroanatomy dental school. Okay, so here's my question. We don't just defer to people with credentials for credentials' sake, but does it seem like in this area she probably knows what she's talking about? The credentials seem to back up, right, what she's going to tell us. Okay, so here's what she has to say in her peer-reviewed article, A Scientific View of When Life Begins. She says the conclusion that human life begins at the sperm-egg fusion is, hear this, because you're going to hear people who say the opposite, and we'll talk about that in a second. It is uncontested. It is objective. It is based on the universally accepted scientific method of distinguishing different cell types from each other, and on ample scientific evidence, thousands of independent peer-reviewed publications. How many of you guys have heard, well, it's not alive? A fetus isn't alive. Okay? Wrong. Yeah, so if someone says it's not alive, wrong. If someone says it's not human, wrong. And this is where we help educate our pro-choice friends. We say, no, friend. It is alive. It is human. We take them to this and we say, science is in agreement. We know what it is. The question is not what it is. We're going to get to the actual question, and you're going to help them see where the real argument is raging, because it's not on if it's alive or human. We know it's alive or human. That's uncontested. Okay? And then she says, even though this is a scientifically solid piece of evidence, it is entirely independent of any specific ethical, moral, political, or religious view of human life. This definition does not directly address the central ethical question surrounding the embryo. What value ought society place on human life? So what's the real question? Does it have more value than the mother? Or what is its value, and how does it increase or decrease? That's where the battle is raging. And so we help our uninformed pro-choice friend with, no, you can still be pro-choice. That's totally fine. It is alive and human, and all of the very smart pro-choice people know that and will say that and will concede as much, and we'll show you that's true. The question is the differentiation we put on the value of an embryo versus a human adult versus a human embryo. Okay? That's really where the battle is. Okay? So let's look at that for a minute. Okay. So again, this is not a religious argument. This is secular pro-life. Strongly recommend checking her out. I love her. She's great. She says, hi, there are over 12 million non-religious pro-lifers in the United States. We know there is life before birth because of modern medicine, not sacred text. Scientific consensus that human life begins at fertilization is overwhelming. Here are all of her resources on her website for claims that people mean when they say, it's not really alive. There's no consensus on when life begins. Here's all of her rebuttals. What do we mean by alive? Explains. Embryos are just like sperms, eggs, etc. All of her rebuttals. All of this. They're just parasites. They're the same thing as a tumor. They don't have heartbeats. It's just electronic movement. That's a crazy one that's been really recent and weird. Electrical, right here, yeah, ultrasounds are detecting electrical activity. Fetuses can't feel pain. All of her rebuttals. Strongly suggest you checking her out. She's fascinating. Okay, yes, secular pro-life. All right, so I'm going to play a video for you. I want to be really clear. This video is loaded language in the pro-life camp. So if that bothers you, just that's just no. That's what's happening.
Kill an innocent human being. I agree. Abortion kills a human being. I agree. When I do an abortion, I am clear what she has asked me to do for her.
This is the abortion provider.
She's asked me to remove a fetus from her. I am clear that in your terms, it is the intentional killing of a fetus.
So when you crush a human skull, it's not really gray matter, it's white brain matter that oozes out?
What's your point?
No, I'm asking you a question. Is the brain matter that oozes out when you crush a human skull white?
What does it matter? You describe what I do. So what is your point?
My point is that it intentionally kills an innocent human being. Would you concede the point?
I started my first concession was to your first two syllogisms, that abortion kills a human being. It is the intentional disruption of a pregnancy that kills a human being.
How many innocent human beings have you intentionally killed?
Okay, so that's Dr. Willie Parker. That is, again, your poster boy for Planned Parenthood. He performs abortions as his Christian service to the community. He is a self-proclaimed Christian. We can take that as it will. I don't know if you guys noticed me moderating there in the back. That was me, just chilling there. And it was fun, too, because there was like a ton of commentary on the internet, and everybody was like, she's so like favoring Dr. Willie Parker. She's super pro-choice. She's totally not being fair. And my brother was watching, and he was like, yeah, I think so. I don't think that's true. But yeah, so, okay, this was a really fascinating debate because he pretty much says through the course of the debate quite a few times, I am ending a human life. I'm ending life. Innocent human being, ending pregnancy, right? He's very open to admit that that is what a pregnancy or an abortion is. Why is he so willing to concede that? Why is he so willing to concede that? It's not bothering him, right? He's saying it out of his mouth. He is performing the abortions that are ending the human lives. Why does that not bother him? Because he doesn't think it's a person. Right. So we're going to talk about that. All right, let's talk about that. That's where the real war of this whole argument is being fought. What is a person? What I think it is a stupid word. Anyway, all right. So for fun, we're just going to actually diagnose what kind of rhetoric you're going to see out and about as we're talking about all of this. So I found this blog. It's called The Friendly Atheist. So it's just some guy talking. And he says in his blog, and we're going to go through this together. We're going to diagnose together. He says, there is no clear-cut answer for when life begins. Pause. Is that a true statement? No. So we've got two options, right? What are the two options about his intentions? He's either lying or ignorant. That's exactly right.
He said it on the internet.
He's either lying or he is misinformed. That's really important because he's telling you something and he's either lying to you or he's misinformed, grossly misinformed. However, he says the personhood debate has been going on for a long time. Check mark. Well, yeah, I mean, yes, legally. I don't know. Would you disagree?
Yeah, I'd say it's a recent fabrication.
A reason. Yes.
Gender, biological sex thing.
Yes, right. Yes, no, it literally mimics the gender and sex thing. We'll talk about why personhood became a thing, and it's because of legalese is really a huge part of why this term exists.
Like societies have been bickering about what makes a person a person.
So when he says personhood debate, what he's really trying to say is like value subscriptions. What's the word? Ascribing value. Ascriptions. How would I say that in that tense? I don't know. Ascribing value to other humans, right? And what makes them persons or not persons, right? Like slaves having different levels of like legal protection. That's a part of the personhood debate. How much of a person are they, okay? So yes, that's been going on a long time. You're correct in terms of like the terminology, very new to our legal proceedings with that term. Okay. And much of the abortion debate hinges on where different groups draw the line of when it becomes a person. Is it the moment of conception that it becomes a person? Is it after the first heartbeat, brain development? When is it viable? Now catch this. This is funny and it's sneaky. He says, And when should women no longer have the right to decide what happens inside their bodies? There's undoubtedly murky ground near the end of the 3rd trimester when the fetus is viable, and women in some places still have the right to an abortion, but those instances are incredibly rare. Okay, go back. What does he say? When should women no longer have the right to decide what happens inside their bodies? And then what does he immediately do? Tells women what to do with their bodies. Do you see how he did that? Because what did he just tell women in his last sentence?
They shouldn't have it with the pregnancy advice.
Yes, so he literally just came down on his stance after literally just chastising you for even thinking about telling a woman what she should do with her body. He just does the same thing. It's obnoxious, but it's tricky. How many of you guys would not have caught that if you had just read it in passing? Wouldn't have thought twice about it. Because you kind of agree with him, like, yeah, you definitely shouldn't do it in the 3rd trimester, but you miss the point that he's literally trying to make you feel bad about having a position about other people's right to abortion and then telling you when he thinks you shouldn't have a right to abortion anymore. It's crazy.
Just the devil's advocate, can we read it as like, okay, look, it gets pretty ridiculous though.
Says who?
Like,
Says who? I don't think it's ridiculous. It's not a person until it's born. Like 2 of those girls in your Worldview Wednesday. It's not a person until it's born. And that's well after 3rd trimester. That's at the end. That's 4th trimester.
What? I'm lost now, actually.
So if someone says, well, he's just being hyperbolic because we all kind of realize, like, it's a little ridiculous by the 3rd trimester.
I'm saying this up to this point.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and a lot of people do think that, but what I'm saying is, who are you to say? What makes it different? And I'll get there. Of like, who are you? Yeah, and I'm going to get there. Yeah, we're going to get to the slippery slope of that. Yeah. Okay, one more person. Yes, you're getting ahead of me. One more person that we're going to look at. Her name is Miranda Sawyer. She's a philosopher, a modern philosopher. So, I'm just kidding.
Modernist philosopher.
Modernist.
Modern philosopher.
You're a modern philosopher, and I like you. She says, okay, so she's talking about her journey with pro-choice. Okay, she says, she got pregnant. She said, I was calling the life inside of me a baby because I wanted it. Yet if I hadn't wanted it, I would have thought of it as just a group of cells that's okay to kill. And that seemed irrational to me, maybe even immoral. Hey, guess what, Miranda? You're onto something. It is irrational. It is immoral. But what's her conclusion? Her conclusion is, in the end, I have to agree that life begins at conception. Awesome. Yes, that abortion is ending life. Awesome. Perhaps the fact of life isn't what's important. It's whether that life has grown enough to start becoming a person. So what's her caveat for becoming a person? What would be her criteria? Grown enough. She doesn't even use a fancy word. We're going to use her words. Whether it has grown enough. Anybody want to guess at what enough is? Because I don't know what she means.
I teach high school students, and I think some of them might not have even made it to that.
Grown enough. All right, so here's the kicker with this conversation. We have moved out of the realm of science. Because what does science tell us?
Conception.
Life begins at conception. It's human and it's alive at conception. Alive, human. Science, yay. Science is on our team. Great. Problem is we're moving this into a philosophical framework to talk about it, which is fine. Philosophy is fine. But the reason that this is happening is because we're trying to dissociate personhood from humanness. Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay? Because that's exactly what she's doing. She's dissociating personhood from humanness, and I'll show you how she's doing it and how our whole modern culture does it. All right, so let's talk about personhood according to the law, because a lot of this is like about whether abortion should be legal, right? It's about legislating abortion. So according to the law, a personhood is the status of being a person. That's helpful, right? That's like a really good definition, right? Because it's got the word from the word in the definition. It's a great definition. It's not a good definition, okay? It's the status of being a person. And according to the law, this is important, only a natural person, which means you were born here, right? Or a legal personality, which means you legally became an American citizen, because we're talking about American legal proceedings of abortion, okay? Only natural persons and legal persons have rights, protections, privileges, responsibilities, and legal liability, right? Particularly the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Those are rights that you have as an American citizen. You have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Someone cannot infringe upon your life just because they want to, because you have rights in America. Okay? So in 1973, when Roe versus Wade was happening and the decision was being made, what the U.S. Supreme Court did was they found that the word person, as used in the 14th Amendment, does not include the unborn. They are not included in the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? They weren't included as a person. So you could legislate now accordingly that they don't have rights, protections, privileges, and responsibilities, or legal liabilities. They have none of those things because they're not protected by the law, because they are not, in the eyes of the law, a person. That's what happened in Roe v. Wade. All right. Fascinatingly, I actually made this before Roe v. Wade was overturned, and then it was overturned. So now, again, it's back in the hands of the states to figure out on their own, and that's been a crap fest. Anyway, all right. So here's where I'm going to show you that you can win this argument with someone who's pro-choice, because the philosophy is on your side just as much as the science is on your side, okay? So we've gotten the science on our side, and we can educate someone through that if that's where you want to start in the conversation. But if they're like, yeah, okay, scientifically I get it, but I don't think it's a person either, let's talk about that. You're not the first person in history who has looked at a group of people and said that they're not persons. Here's the problem with that. Personhood based on any criteria outside of merely being alive and human, these are our scientific qualifiers, inherently leads to discrimination, oppression, and in the worst cases, genocide. Okay, so who can tell me about what the 3/5 compromise is? And this really happened. What was the 3/5 compromise?
When they were deciding like which states got how many votes, they decided that for like to benefit the southern states, they would count slaves as 3/5 of a person.
Yes.
Instead of a whole person.
Yes. Okay, so in the eyes of a law, in this particular period of time, 1787, slaves were 3/5 of a person in terms of legal representation. Does that seem silly to anybody else? It's a little silly. It's a little arbitrary, okay? Because there's no difference between a free man and a slave other than there's like more melanin in one of the skin tones. That's literally the only differentiation, okay? More melanin, less of a person. Can you see the problem with that logic already? You see where that got us through history? Let's look at some other ones. Does anybody know who these people are right here? Or what people group? These are Jews. This is the Holocaust. This is a picture where these men have dug their own graves. They're about to be shot into their own graves. Horrifying, horrifying reality. Fascinatingly, okay, so this was basically a genocide of a people group, right? They were alive and human. Do you guys know the way in which they were able to successfully do this over time? How did they do this? Because it's kind of weird when you think about the fact that just all of a sudden, like a small group of people just started killing like thousands and thousands and thousands of people. How did they get away with this? You would think it would be really easy for like an uprising, but it wasn't. Because for years previously, there had been building blocks to keep that from happening. Those building blocks were, what did the Jewish people lose over time? Rights and legal protections. And then their belongings. And then their communities. Their sense of identity. Okay, so what did they start calling Jewish people? Rats and vermin was a big one. Because what have you done now if you're calling them rats and vermin? You're dehumanizing them. You're taking away that personhood. Okay? This has happened before. Any time that you try and add another qualifier, I'll even write it out this way. Okay, if we're trying to define personhood and who qualifies, you must have 3 qualifiers, okay? The first one is alive. We all agree with that. The second one is human. If you want rights, protections, privileges, you need to be alive and you need to be a human, okay? The personhood debate has essentially given us now a third category that we have to fill. If you're Miranda, your third category is alive, human, and grown enough. Okay? If you were in America and you were a slave, it was alive, human, and Aryan, or less melanin, or, different biological homeland or whatever it was, right? In this one, same thing, alive, human, Aryan, right? If you weren't Aryan, you were screwed. And it wasn't just Jewish people, gypsies, people with disabilities, mentally ill people. They didn't want anybody that wasn't a master race. That's a legitimate concept from this period. To have personhood, you needed to have 3 qualifiers, okay? That's a problem. I don't know what that is. I was just in there for free.
A video that's probably broken down.
I've never had a video in there, so I don't really know unless I just added it because I thought it was great. I don't know.
It's an ad.
Oh yeah, here's my ad, right? Yeah. All right, so here is the logical conclusion of personhood based on criteria, okay? If personhood is based on 3 criteria, here's the reality. This is what our current culture actually believes, okay? If you are an alive human and you meet a certain function, quality, or ability, then we can grant you personhood. That quality, function, or ability could be heartbeat, feels pain in the 3rd trimester, viable outside of the womb. Those are all functions, qualities, or abilities that this alive human is having to qualify as well as just being alive and human in order to qualify for personhood. And if this thing, this fetus in this particular conversation, does not qualify in the other function or ability, then it is neither immoral nor unethical for us to eradicate them. They don't have rights. There's nothing wrong. The law is not only not obligated to lend them rights, you couldn't even classify what you're doing against them as discrimination. They don't even qualify that you could say they're being discriminated against. Okay? That's a problem.
Your video is the White Rose Resistance.
Oh, it's a good one.
Oh, good. Oh, okay.
It's about being an abolitionist. I sent you the link.
Oh, cool. Okay, cool. Well, this is the modern day abolition, so here you are. All right. What's interesting about this one, right? So okay. Here's the kicker. Here's where the rubber meets road. You've heard a lot of different things that people have said about the 3rd qualifier, right, that they think fetuses should have to qualify for personhood. They don't know that that's what they're doing, but when they say heartbeat, feels pain, viable, over 24 weeks, at birth, they're giving you a 3rd criteria to qualify for personhood that it does protect them against abortions under the law. That's what they're saying. I can actually narrow down what everyone in our culture who's pro-choice would agree with pretty much, and it's going to shock you. This is the 3rd qualifier that our culture believes, hook, line, and sinker. If the mom wants it or not. Because if the mom decides she doesn't want it for any reason and can justify it by any silly or serious justification, that's enough for most people, right? You do you, honey boo boo, you live your best life, you do what's good for you, you don't upend your whole life with a baby, because if you have a baby, your life is over, don't you know that? My life is over 3 times over because I have 3 babies. My life is over, okay? The 3rd qualifier for personhood that most people will go along with in our culture is if the mom wants it or not, which is why you have people and I'm not ragging on her personally, but why when Chrissy Teigen had her miscarriage, everyone was very upset. Chrissy Teigen is married to John Legend. She's a famous actress. She's also a very outspoken pro-choice person who miscarried at the same gestation that she would advocate abortion being legal. So it's kind of an odd dichotomy to me. The difference between Chrissy Teigen and the person she was supporting to get an abortion is that Chrissy Teigen wanted her baby and was miscarried even though she wanted the baby, versus the woman who doesn't want the baby and she's like, you do you, honey boo boo, you go get that abortion. Okay, here's my philosophical position, which is to stop using weird words that mince things unnecessarily, like gender and sex. Stupid. Okay, the logical conclusion of the inherent personhood alive to all humans. This is my position, and it is, if it is a human being and it is alive, it is a person. And therefore it has value and is entitled to rights. That's it. You need no other qualifier. That third qualifier in my position does not exist. All right? Now, it's important for us to remember that, a lot of people look and be like, well, our laws are good, and we got it right, and we're fine. But cultures often get it wrong, legally, in all kinds of ways, but even legally especially. Okay? Cultures often get things wrong. The 3/5 compromise was legal. The genocide of the Jewish people was legal. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but when it was over, they had to have a trial called the Nuremberg trials where another country tried Germany because Germany's laws said that what they did was fine. So another country had to come in and legislate against them. And what they said to them was, you are being held to a law above the law, which we would argue is the natural law, which stems from a biblical worldview. But they weren't trying them based on German law, because if they did, all of the Nazis would have been off hook, line, sinker, fine. Because what they did was legal. It's fascinating. Okay, so cultures often get things wrong. And I would say that the personhood dilemma of our particular culture is an example of this. Our laws are often unjust, incorrect, and we acknowledge acknowledge when we get it wrong, right, in order for us to be philosophically, ethically, and morally consistent. And especially now that, abortion is, in my opinion, wrong at any stage for any reason, and we'll talk about that. But, even especially now that we can take care of micro-preemies, even people who are not persuaded to my position should at least see the wild irony of what we legislated 50 years ago and where we've come medically when it comes to fetuses and caring for preemie babies. So, okay. All right, so the reason why does the mother want the fetus is actually what I think our culture believes, and why it's really inconsistent is because you can actually look at this civil liability for prenatal injuries up in, I think it's New York, case law. I think it's in New York. And what it says is that if you are driving and you kill a pregnant woman, you are going for double manslaughter unless you can prove that she was conspiring with an abortion provider to go get an abortion, in which case it's only singular manslaughter. Or homicide, I think. No, manslaughter, because it's second degree. So you can imagine why that would be important to the person who's representing the guy who just killed the pregnant woman. Why they would want to try and prove that she was conspiring with an abortion provider to get an abortion, because his sentence is going to be way lighter if they can prove that it's not double vehicular manslaughter. Yes?
If anybody wants this presentation, would you send it to them?
Yeah, of course. All right. So the ever-changing line of pseudoscience, okay? If a human fetus is not a person until a certain point, and this is what we start asking people who are drawing arbitrary lines for that third qualifier, the way that we can help them come to the position that that's silly is by doing this, which is a reductio ad absurdum technique, which just means reducing to the most absurd to show that the argument doesn't work, okay? So if someone says it's not a fetus until a certain point, like the girl who said 24 weeks, I would literally, I know you couldn't argue with them, and you did a great job. You were very awesome. We were bragging on you earlier. I'm sure. When she said 24 weeks, if you were able to do your reductio ad absurdum, you would say, okay, well, what about 23 weeks, 6 days, and 23 hours? Right? And then you just start taking it back. And what you're showing them is that the line is arbitrary. There's no actual legitimate reason or science behind it. And that is a beautiful use of reductio ad absurdum. Okay, I'm not going to go through this, but she basically, hers are it has to be conscious as well as alive and human. But in that case, then we can kill every unconscious person who's taking away all of the funding from our medical people who are having to care for all these unconscious people. Just whack them off, doesn't matter, right? If they're not reasonable, I can assure you that my newborn is not reasonable. I can just off my newborn because she's difficult. Self-motivated activity. You talk about any person who's severely handicapped, severely mentally ill. You're discriminating. It's what's happening. These definitions discriminate against a group of people always. Okay? All right. This is when we get into SLED, which is another sort of reductio ad absurdum. It's to help people see that creating a third criteria doesn't work because anything they're using to create a third criteria is not a good reasoning skill to create a third criteria. So like the two people who said it's not alive until birth, I would send them to this Laura Clausen video, which is a satirical video called The Magical Birth Canal. And she basically holds this baby in front of it and she's like, not a person, person, not a person, person. And she like makes a whole satire on the ridiculousness of that philosophical position. And then at the very end, someone in the back is like, what about a C-section? Because the whole idea is the magical birth canal is what grants you personhood, and it's very funny. And she is a Canadian satirist, pro-life advocate, love her. She's working in a much more difficult environment because Canada is much more pro-abortion than we are. I love her. She's also beautiful and very funny, and I really like her a lot. And she's Protestant, which is nice because like I love Catholics, but a lot of pro-life advocates are Catholic, and it will tie into their theology. Protestants who do pro-life work, I can relate to differently because I have different philosophical like theology things, but yeah. Anyway, that's like neither here nor there. So, okay, some of the reasons that people discriminate that are bad reasons, right? Well, okay, size. The embryo is literally this big, all right? And Shaquille O'Neal is this big, okay? Therefore, obviously, Shaquille O'Neal has more rights and more personhood, right? Wrong, okay. Level of development. You know, an embryo or a, 10-week-old fetus is way less developed than Grant Andrew Forrester back there. So Grant Andrew Forrester is obviously way more valuable than the 10-week-old, right?
Right.
Wrong.
What would you say to someone who says that we, as a society, already accept that less developed people have less civil rights? Like, a 6-year-old can't vote for the president.
I would say they're conflating rights. Rights to life and rights to vote are very different. But great question. Does that help? We need to not conflate terms, and people will do that very often. So when I say the right to vote, like, yeah, I don't let my 6-year-old drive my car, but I'm not going to off my 6-year-old because he annoys me one day and I'm 30 and therefore more valuable, and if he's impeding on my life, I'm just going to get rid of him. That's what people who are doing that are arguing for when they make those claims, yeah. Is that good?
But he's born, so it's
You're an idiot. But I have so much morning sickness, and it's really bothering my Instagram follows, and so if I just get the abortion... I know, that's silly. It's silly, I'm teasing. Environment, okay? So like the fetus is inside of the body. If you want to be really pro-choice in your terminology, it's a cancer inside of her body. It's sucking all of her resources. It's hurting her physically. It's making her sick. She can't do anything. It could hurt her. She could die, which is usually how it's painted by someone who's pro-choice, right? Like, it's like literally the worst thing that could happen to a female's body. You're going to die. It's terrible. It's so painful. It's so horrible. It's not like women have been doing it for all of history because they were literally biologically designed to do it. Okay, but, I am outside of the womb. I am therefore much more valuable, right? Wrong, because then we take it back. Okay, when Elliot was inside of my body at 5 a.m., was he not a person? And then at 5:12, when he was outside of my body, was he then a person? His environment just changed, right? He went through the magical birth canal. No, he's no less of a human 12 minutes previous than he is 12 minutes after. Okay, last one, degree of dependency, and this is a really tough one because people are like, oh, well, the baby is dependent on the woman inside of her but also outside, but usually they're thinking dependent like inside of her womb and all of that, those resources that the baby is taking. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, what if I have a child with a severe disability who will literally be dependent on me for the rest of my life? Is that less of a person? There's two really good reductio ad absurdums for this one, okay? Sure, okay, a fetus inside of me is actually dependent on my body up until a certain point of weeks, right? True. It is dependent on my body. My newborn, if I left her on the forest floor on my way home from the hospital, would she survive? Is she a person? Okay, but she's still fully dependent on me. What's going to happen if I leave her on the forest floor? She's going to die. right? She's still fully dependent on me. Now let's say I left my newborn baby on the way home from the hospital on the forest floor and she has cerebral palsy, right? Or let's say I actually take her home, but she has severe cerebral palsy her whole life, because you will have cerebral palsy your whole life. She will always be dependent on me. Is she less of a person? No.
I don't know if you have this in your presentation. You can add like a sub-point to your dependency and put quality of life.
Yeah, because then people say, oh, their quality of life is so bad. We cannot determine other people's quality of life. We can't. And we can talk about that in the Q&A about like, oh, they're going to go into foster care and they're going to get beat and abused. And so your solution is kill them now?
Like their Down syndrome.
Yeah, oh yeah, uh-huh. Oh yeah, have you heard it was like Finland or whatever? They're like, we eradicated Down syndrome, and what they mean by that is they have like a 99% abortion rate for Down syndrome babies because they're really big on testing for it before the babies are born. This is a really old picture now. This is when I only had one baby. Okay, let's end it here so we can do Q&A. I'm excited about Q&A. I hope you guys have questions. All right, practical conclusions. If abortions are the same as a skin tag removal, why would we ever limit them? Nobody ever talks about the ethical dilemma of going and getting a wart frozen off, right? Like you're not like texting your girl chat like, I have to get this wart removed, what do I do? Right? No. Okay, we don't have ethical conversations about cyst removals because it's not human and alive, and we know that there's a difference, okay? There is a moral and ethical pulse on the conversation of abortion because my body, my choice is a slogan and it's a lie, and no matter how many times we say it, it doesn't make it true. It's propaganda. And what's actually really fascinating, I don't know if you guys realize this, I think this is true, because of social media, we might find ourselves in some ways very informed, right? We have information at our fingertips. Overload, I would say too much. I think we have way too much information at our fingertips. You are the most propagandized to that any culture has ever been, ever. Information comes to you so much faster, in so much more frequency and variety. You are literally, every time you're looking at your phone, you're being propagandized to in some way, I assure you. Fascinating, okay? It happened all through history. We've had propaganda. But think about how long it would take when it was coming into your community on the horseback of somebody, or in a pamphlet, or at a local community meeting that took months to put together for all the founding fathers to get to the same state. Like, it's crazy how much we're propagandized to today. Be aware of that. Don't think yourself too smart for it, okay? Why I give this talk, okay? And again, I normally give this in a mixed company, so there are like really angry pro-choice people here usually, okay? I give this presentation not to shame past decision-making, but to inform future decision-making, okay? I'm not trying to make you feel like the worst person who's ever existed because of your decisions or your position. I want you to be well-informed for your future decisions. Okay, I've made bad decisions and then made better ones, and I hope that all of us can be morally and ethically consistent when we realize that we're wrong and move into a correct position. I believe that being truly pro-woman means doing what is actually best for women. That includes unborn women who are discriminated against in abortion. And I would say to be pro-life, anti-abortion, you can call me anti-abortion, you can call me anti-choice, it doesn't bother me at all. I will happily take those terms if the choice is abortion. I am anti-choice of the anti-abortion camp. No abortions. Okay? To be pro-life, in my opinion, is to be, not just my opinion, I would say, as I've proven tonight, to be pro-life is to be pro-science, pro-woman, and pro-human rights. Okay? This is a human rights conversation. If you're interested in some cool resources, there's Asher when he was just a little baby. That's Josh's first of his 3. Kinza also has 3. I have 3. We've all gotten pregnant, well, his wife, we've all gotten pregnant 3 times at the same time. I promise we didn't plan it. Nobody believes us. So between the 3 of us, we now have 9 kiddos that run around every day with each other. They're all best friends, and it's amazing. Here are some really good resources. Stand to Reason, it's more philosophical and apologetic. Equal Rights Institute, same thing, but a little bit nicer. Choice 42, she's the satirist from Canada, Laura Clausen. Students for Life, they're awesome. American, all over different campuses. Live Action, that's Lila Rose, really awesome Catholic pro-life activist. Genocide Awareness Project, they're really big on like photos of abortions. So if you're like interested in that, that's a very difficult way to do it. Aggressive but effective is a good way to put it. And Secular Pro-Life, like I said, not a Christian, but great scientific resource. Yeah, and I'll tell you, I stand out there and sign sometimes. It's been a while, but the most vitriolic responses I've ever gotten in this conversation are from women who have had an abortion or have assisted in an abortion. So it's important to understand that the reason that this is so difficult to talk about is you're talking to people who are deeply wounded, deeply emotional, and deeply irrational when it comes to this. So it can be very frustrating when you feel like you're not gaining ground. And it's important to understand that the people that you're probably going to be gaining the most ground with are your average uninformed student versus the woman who's experienced abortion. You're going to be very different about how you navigate those conversations with a post-abortive woman. All right, Q&A time. I actually put objections up there if you just like want to do them for fun, for my sake. Yay, okay, questions. We'll go here first.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, frequently it's still rape and incest.
Yes.
And so, I don't know, but, you know, the stats are
Very low.
rape and incest.
Right, very low. Where's my black pen?
Because it's like, they give the rape and incest argument. And
Yeah.
what we talk about frequently is if that many people are getting raped and are victims of incest, we have some real problems in our society.
Amen. Truly. But they don't not exist. Like, they do
Right,
exist.
yeah.
And I actually watched a really interesting, it's a guy, he does an expose show where he just has someone sit in front of camera and he asks them questions. I cannot remember the name of it. I watch it on Facebook because I'm old. He talks to a woman who came from an Amish community, and she talks about like how much like the culture there is pretty deviant and evil. Fascinating, but sad, very sad. But when you're talking about, so how many of you guys are actually interested in like how would I talk to someone who's like, what about rape and incest? Because that is a very common objection. Okay, cool. So the way that I would approach it to someone that I know is not post-abortive, okay? So we're just having like an argument and they're comfortable engaging in an argument with you, okay? Kindly, argument doesn't mean mean, but it means like actual exchange of information, okay? My first question to that person would be like, if I agree with you that it is okay to have an abortion in case of rape and incest, if I agree with you, will you now agree with me that the other 99.07% of abortions are illegal? That would be my first question. Why? What am I trying to sniff out? Otherwise, they're just trying to use the worst case scenario to try and get you scared, right? Or make you flounder, right? Because how dare you think that a rape, incest 14-year-old should carry a baby, okay? Well, so no, okay, if I agree with you, which I don't, but if I agree with you that in case of rape and incest, you should be afforded a right to an abortion, you and I both now agree that 99.07% of abortions are now illegal. Awesome. If they say yes, that's a great starting point if they say yes.
Just to give some numbers, in 2024, the average abortions, I just Googled, well, I ChatGPT'd it. 98,990, given the resources they use. So that was total, or that was the amount that we're seeing, 98,990. So by 0.03, that's 2,969.
Okay, so 2,000 left around, roughly 2,000 still. Okay, so then my next question, okay, so let's say they've said, if they say yes, we move on to the next step. But let's start with if they say, well, no, I actually think that like any woman in any circumstance should have a right to an abortion. Drop the rape and incest conversation. You need to get to defining where they draw a line, if they draw a line, okay? Because worst case scenarios are not effective when a person has a much larger criteria of what they will allow in abortion. You can get back to rape and incest if they really want to be there, but I want to know all of the restrictions, if they have any of them, that they're like, yes, I do think it's wrong in this case, okay? If they say, yes, I'll agree with you that only rape and incest should be allowed, then I'm going to move into the territory of, I appreciate your empathetic heart for rape victims and victims of incest. I hope that you and I can agree that that is a terrible thing, and that you and I can agree that the woman who was raped or incestuously taken advantage of is a victim. Can we both agree? right? We want to make sure that they understand how much common ground we have, right? They are victims. I don't even need to write that. We know they're victims, okay? Does the woman being a victim of a tragic, literally a soul killing, as the Bible explains it, a rape is a killing of her soul, okay? The woman who is a victim of that egregious of an act, does that woman now have the right, if we agree that a person is alive and human, does she now have the right to violate another life in the way that her life was violated? And that's a really tricky question because it's touchy. But the point is that another evil, if abortion isn't evil because it's ending a human life, another evil is not going to make up for the evil that already happened, right? So, again, tricky, challenging. So then they're going to be like, so you're saying that any rape an incest girl who's 12 years old, you're going to say she has to have the baby? What I'm going to respond with is, I believe that the fetus is alive and human and is therefore protected with rights as a distinct human being. And I think that it will be the best thing for the victim mother to provide for the victim baby what she was not provided when she was taken advantage of, right? Which was protection from harm, okay? Also, I would add, and you would want to have the numbers on hand, there's a lot of literature out there about the differences between women who are post-abortive and experiencing self-harm, suicidal ideation, etc., guilt, depression, shame, all of those things post-abortion, versus women who keep the child from a rape and incest, and whether she keeps her forever or adopts them out, the mental health outcomes seem to be better for the mother because it gives her maybe some sense of purpose, right? She's protected something when she wasn't. She maybe realizes that it has its own humanness that she doesn't encroach on. Yeah?
Where would you find that?
I wish I could tell you. Live Action has had some in the past, but you're going to have to look for it specifically. Secular Pro-Life actually gets into a chat room and posts a lot of the chat room of shout my abortion, and it's a lot of the abortion regret. And all the time the women are like, I'm so glad I did it, but I feel dead inside. It's super weird. So I would also be looking there with Secular Pro-Life. So all that to say, the scientific argument is the baby that was conceived in rape and incest is alive and human and therefore deserves rights, right? In our argument, that's what it is. The circumstances that got the baby there are tragic, and we can all agree on that. It wasn't the mother's choice. She was a victim. It was a terrible thing. There are a lot of options for her and what she does with the baby after and moving forward. But if it actually is better for her mental health, if it saves the life of the baby, we should be encouraging her to finish the pregnancy and then take next steps. On top of that, and this is, don't start with emotional appeals, but this is a really good argument that I've heard before. And Mike Adams actually did this one first, but Grant also has heard this from someone he knows, which is if you're telling me that there's a child who's conceived in rape, I would like to call the mother and plead with her to keep that baby. You can go and plead with a woman who has been raped why she should end the life, but there are real life outcomes. So for example, Grant knows a woman who was raped, who had a baby too. Oh yeah, I guess it was a domestic abuser, but had 2 babies who are his age now. And what you would be advocating for now is going and telling the mother of those 2 children that they didn't deserve to live because of the way they were conceived. So that has real world implications when you talk about the baby outside of the womb of the rape victim. So again, okay, a wrong for a wrong doesn't make a right.
There's a guy by the name of Ryan Baumberger who goes around and speaks about conceived in hate.
Oh, he's half black?
Yeah.
Yes, he is awesome.
Yeah. He was conceived in rape.
Yeah.
But he was adopted, and now he's got a ministry where
He's awesome. Or the woman, there's another one, she was tried to be burned in a saline abortion and survived. Although she wasn't conceived in rape, but she's not. Honestly, just abortion survivors in general are phenomenal resources to remind people that they are human beings with rights. And being raped or being the product of a rape does not make you less of a person. Just like if you have a mom who hates you now, you're not less of a person. Okay. Did you have one?
I did.
Okay.
So do you know about the violinist argument?
Yes.
I would love to hear your thoughts on that because I think it is one of the more maybe intellectually consistent positions that pro-life people have.
Love that. Okay, so let's make sure we're talking about the exact same issue. So you're in a car accident, you wake up, and you are giving life support to a world-famous violinist who, if you decide to stop giving life support to that world-famous violinist, they will die, and it is now your obligation to give life support to that violinist, right?
It's also like in the argument, like the community music or whatever, like canvassed all of the blood types in there, and you are the only person who could possibly help this individual's.
Right. Good. Okay, I'm glad we set all the groundwork for that one. Before I give you the answer, can anyone tell me what they think is there is a fatal flaw of this argument, but it's hard to find initially? Can anybody guess other than Christian, Grant, or Tom?
I actually don't think that I get the whole picture. So
You're kidnapped, basically.
The side of the argument is, oh, it's unjust that you're now in the situation
No.
to be giving life support to this person.
Right, just like how a mother is unfair.
You're the victim because you're forced to give life support.
Yes, so you are forced to give incubation to.
They're a famous violinist.
Just to add like weight, I guess.
Okay.
Value, yeah.
Cool.
Can anybody guess the fatal flaw? There is one crucial distinction between a mother who has an unwanted pregnancy and the person who is hooked up to the violinist.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is this related to just abortions in the case of rape or all abortions?
This is all abortions. This is just someone's argument of like, you forcing a mother to keep an unwanted fetus is the same thing as you being chained up to a violinist forced to give life support for the rest of your life.
Which is where the motto, my body, my choice.
Right.
Even if the
There's a really, this is great.
Yeah, even if the conception happens not in a situation of rape, the modern rhetoric is pregnancy is forced.
Wait, stop, hush,
I'm sorry, I thought.
hush, hush,
Sorry.
hush. You're giving it away.
I didn't realize that.
Choice. Okay, that's literally the only clear, important, necessary distinction that is the fatal flaw of this argument is choice. Okay? So in the scenario, we'll start with the violinist scenario. In the violinist scenario is the person, you, who's hooked up to life support to the violinist for the rest of your life. Did you consent to that in the beginning? No. Okay, so the idea was like you black out or you're in a car accident and they find your blood type. The idea is you did not choose, it was thrust upon you. And now you're in the situation that you're connected to this violinist, okay? You did not consent on the front end. Our culture, literally the new propaganda for our culture, right? Consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy. Yes, that is a very common slogan right now. And that is not true. Because what is the only way in which we can become pregnant? By having sex. We were literally designed, whether by God or evolution, whatever you want to say right here, okay? We know biologically the only successful way to have a pregnancy is sexual intercourse between a man and a woman, okay? Now, we talked about rape already, so there are times where there's not consent, and we can go back into the rape argument with that person in a minute. But in the violinist case, its fatal flaw is that the woman who wakes up that next morning and finds herself pregnant chose what? To have sex. And even if she chose to have sex on birth control, with a condom, with him pulling out, you can list any criteria, right? And she still gets pregnant. Her consent to sex was still consent to the possibility of pregnancy. What that argument is trying to do is defer responsibility away from her. As if consenting to sex does not equal to consenting in pregnancy. That is getting into a much deeper issue, which is our third wave feminism, coming from first and second, and we'll get there later.
I also think we see a lot of infantilization of women.
Yes.
In the pro-choice side of this debate.
Women can't do anything if they have a baby.
Yes, and it's like women are consistently victims of pregnancy or victims of their own decisions.
Victims of everything.
Exactly.
100% agree with you. Yeah, 100%.
Would you say, as a response to the violinist, that like pointing out the difference between actively taking someone's life and passively allowing them to die as they would naturally. Like, there's a difference there. Because, like, if you're unplugging yourself from the violinist, you're just allowing them to die as they would without intervention. Whereas, like, with pregnancy, you're taking an active step to stop a natural growth.
Yes, and that's a very good distinction as well. I would be careful not to make that your first one, because you want to start with the choice before you move into more of the technical, because your answer is very good and is actually probably a better argumentation when you're talking about assisted suicides or end-of-life termination and things like that. You want people to clearly agree with you that consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, and waking up being strapped to a violinist against your will is not the same thing. Choice was differentiated. But that's a good point, and you are correct. Yes.
I have a question. So, do you think you would have a hard time recognizing that consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, since we don't have that final cause built into sex in our culture? Like, we don't think about
Christian.
sex means to have a baby.
Oh, Christian.
Like, the goal of sex is to have a baby, right? Like, we would recognize that because we have essences. So we have
Yeah. So part of it is like, obviously, like, because I'm a Christian and because I affirm the philosophical idea that we have essences and natures that are inherent to themselves, it's easy for me to see the cause and effect. How do I say this without coming off obnoxious about it? Most people that you're arguing with have been inundated by bad philosophies, but don't even know them well enough that they're using them to try and get around your argument. They're just literally so propagandized to by the last 70 years of second and third wave feminism that they really believe that they're entitled to the same sexual freedom that men are in terms of like sexual one-night stands that you can leave with no responsibility. And the only way that that was possible for women was what? Birth control or abortion, which is why Roe v. Wade is at the same time as chemical birth control and abortion on demand. All of this was happening at the same time because in first wave feminism, it was equality to men under the law. And the second wave of feminism was equality to be men, to be like men, to do the things that men do. And in that definition, what that meant was not have the same responsibilities. Right? Because we knew in 1950, 60, if a woman gets pregnant, she's a socially outcasted. It changes her whole life. The man can walk away. Now you have chemical birth control. You have abortion on demand. Women are now able to be sexually free the same way they viewed men as being able to be sexually free, which was the goal, a lot in a way, of second wave feminism. So it's a problem. Yeah, you've been sloganed for 70 years.
What would you say to people who go, like, what about ectopic pregnancy?
Yes. Good question. I want to say one more thing on this, though, because I don't feel like I completely answered it, and I am going to answer ectopic pregnancies. You're going to have to actually educate people on the fact that consent to sex is consent to pregnancy, because they are, like, steps of the same thing. But, yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous that we even have to do that.
What about the violinist argument for the case of rape?
Yeah, so then I would take them to our previous answer about, like, women's mental health, about the difference between the violinist is that, like, you have an alive human that you are directly responsible for. You know what? That's good. I'm actually glad that you clarified that. Yeah.
I feel like I have something to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it is the way that we feel like you're strapped to a violinist for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
That would be then the violinist argument would be a good argument for allowing abortion during rape, but they're not analogous, so it's a false analogy, because really analogous would be you're strapped to a violinist for a limited time. So
Yeah, 9
9
months.
9 months. If you were strapped in for 9 months, I'd argue that you're terrible if you would strap yourself to that violinist. I think you haven't been murdered. I think it'd be a distinction without a difference if you're just saying, oh, I'm letting him die versus attacking him, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
just making him die.
Mm-hmm.
It's a limited amount of time you're strapped to this guy. Your consent of when it happens. It's terrible you were forced to be strapped to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But now you are, and so choosing, if you know that we're covered in a certain amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
then it would be immoral for you.
Mm-hmm. I also, oh yeah.
But I do think that that position is exactly why women who are the victims of rape do choose to have their babies.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, I almost think that the violence argument is effective when it comes to cases of rape
It sound like on its face it sounds very much, because what you're getting into that people don't understand, and we have to now use this terminology, is you're talking about different camps of moral and ethical conversations. So utilitarian, right, versus virtue. So even in this, right, so like when you're talking about something utilitarian, right, it's helping the most people regardless of like any value statement you place on them. So like a utilitarian would be like, if this room is on fire, I grab the closest people to me. But in reality, if the room's on fire, I'm grabbing Grant first, because I'm a virtue ethics. Like I have different value systems and moral hierarchies that I do subscribe to. And while it is a good argument, there is something to be said about, while she was put in this terrible position, this child is fundamentally linked to her in a way that the violinist is not, if that makes sense. It is a distinct individual, but it is not, I think, to the same ethical, like,
Parents have a moral responsibility to care for their children.
yeah, like even more so.
For like a random dude.
Yeah, which I would think the right thing to do would be help the dude, try and be selfless as much as possible, but like even more so for like, you know, a child that you haven't.
Duty bound to me like my child is.
Huh?
A stranger's not duty bound to me like my child.
Exactly. So like when we talk about, because this gets very utilitarian very fast, but we don't live in a utilitarian society. Like, I mean, you could think of it in 100 different ways. Like if there are two people hanging off a cliff and I can only save one, it's going to usually be the person who has more moral value, in my opinion. So if it's a child and an adult, I'm grabbing the child. If it's someone I know and a stranger, it's someone I know, right? Does that make me a morally evil person? No, it's because we live in a virtue ethics world in which we place value differently. It's just the reality. We shouldn't be utilitarian. I actually think it's really like detrimental when you take it on the grand scale. So I know that was like, I hope that connected how that like becomes utilitarian really fast.
You're saying this be even worse to kill me than the violence? Like,
Yes.
that's what the violence died.
Yes, like it's even worse because of virtue ethics. It's even worse if it's the baby than the violinist. But we should probably try and save both. We should try and save both. Not even probably. We should.
Question if we are stuck forever.
But that's the thing, like even in that,
I mean, it's not realistic.
no, yeah, because you're not strapped to the baby forever.
Yeah.
Like women who
No,
conceive.
I'm talking about out of abortion, just a fun thought experiment.
Forget the connection to abortion.
Just like someone is thinking, yeah, like you're stuck
All right.
forever.
Yeah, right. Okay, let me do ectopic and then I'm coming to you. All right, so ectopic pregnancy is a good one, and some of you probably already know this, so we'll go through this one fast. But with ectopic pregnancies, does anybody know what an ectopic is?
When a fetus implants somewhere other.
Right, so for people who might be unfamiliar with like the general shape, right, you've got the ovaries, you got your fallopian tubes, and you got your uterus, right? You got the little egg, gets fertilized on one of the sides, it travels down the fallopian tube, it implants into this wall. When you take RU486, you're shedding that lining, that's, you know, all that. An ectopic pregnancy is when this embryo doesn't make it into the uterus and gets stuck anywhere out here. It's usually in the fallopian tube. Does anybody know what will happen if that goes untreated? The fallopian tube will explode. It'll only expand to a certain amount. It'll explode. The woman will bleed out. I think it can happen within like an hour, if not faster. It's very quick. It's very serious. Okay? With an ectopic pregnancy, you're not talking about abortion. You're in a totally different category. So how many of you guys watched Pearl Harbor? Have any of you guys ever seen that? Like really dramatic? Yeah. So in Pearl Harbor, it's like a dramatization in the movie, but this did really happen in the sense of like they were bombed, right? And a bunch of men were harmed, injured, dying, right? More than you could possibly take care of. And they're taking them all to the island hospital, okay? What were the women doing as soon as these men rolled in the movie? Do you remember?
They were marking them with red lipstick.
They were
Vile.
viable or not. Right, yes. So they marked their foreheads with red lipstick to decide whether or not they were going to be able to save their life, okay? That practice on the most like huge term like of that movie is called triaging, right? The concept of triaging is you are going to be saving as many lives as possible, knowing that you will not save all of them. It's literally impossible. You do not have enough manpower, you do not have enough time, you do not have enough resources, okay? That was triaging at its maximum. So women were literally writing on men's foreheads whether or not they should even try to care for them because they were not all going to make it. Horrible to be in that situation, okay? Same for a woman in an ectopic, and I actually have a really close friend who had an ectopic pregnancy, and it was really crazy to watch because they almost sent her home. And she was in so much pain they kept her, and then she started bleeding out and saved her life. If she had gone home, she would have been dead, okay? Wild. So in that situation with her, what it immediately became is triage, okay? So what was the goal with her ectopic pregnancy? To save as many lives as possible, knowing that they could not save them all. And what was the outcome of that? The fetus wasn't going to make it because we do not have the technology at this point to move an embryo into the uterus. Now, we might actually be able to do that one day. We just can't now. Okay? So they triaged her. Okay? What would be the difference in that situation? A triage, okay, where you are saving as many lives as possible, knowing that you cannot save them all. What's the difference between that and an abortion? What is the goal of an abortion?
To remove pregnancy matter.
All right, to kill one, to end one, hopefully only one, but sometimes more because, you know, they're not all, botched abortions do exist, but to end one. Okay, so the intentional ending of a life, the intentional saving of as many lives as possible, knowing that not all of them will be saved. Do you see the category distinction? Now, where this gets difficult is when you talk about actual medical coding. So if you guys are familiar with how like they bill on insurance, they code everything, which is how they price things. When they code anything related to a miscarriage, ectopic, etc., they're going to code a D&C D&E as an abortion procedure. That is not a moral wrong if you have to have a D&E because you have miscarried or have an ectopic pregnancy. That's really important for you to understand that they are not the same. And I know how hard that can be because I had another friend who miscarried. Her ultrasound at 8 weeks had no heartbeat. And they said you can wait a few weeks and hopefully your body will expel naturally, and it didn't happen. And so then she called to go in and have a D&E. And the insurance said, we don't cover elective abortions. And she said, I'm miscarrying. And they said, I am so sorry. And she said, y'all need to have better etiquette of how you ask this in the future. I was pissed. That's where some of this gets complicated because medical coding isn't great, and they'll just call everything abortion or, you know, D&E, and they're not all the same in terms of what actually has happened. So.
Okay, so I want to say a couple things. We saw the Insta video last week that you did, and it was, I know you've heard this, but it was really impressive how chipper you were, even though it was hard. The answers were hard, so it just really captured us. And then the other part of that was we started talking about, like back in the 80s and 90s, I don't remember it being like categorized that abortion was a right. When did that happen? Like when did that transition?
That's such a good question.
I don't remember exactly when.
Yeah. See, that's kind of fun. So this is where I get into my second wave feminism talk. So interestingly, as I understand it, and I'm willing to, I'm going to hold this more loosely because I've done a little bit of research, but not nearly as much. It was actually much more coded and like language oriented as a right in the 70s. That was actually when it was more prevalently because it was being fought for as a right, you know what I mean? So like you had like a lot of advocation. You've got Margaret Sanger, who's like the poster child for all of that. You've got, what's her name, Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, who are writing a lot of literature and propelling the idea of like sex on demand, the right to act like men, abortion as a right. Now, abortion as health care, that became much more popular when Planned Parenthood started going under fire. So that was happening, if I understand it correctly, somewhere in like 2015. Okay. There was a lot of stuff that was coming out. You had like the undercover journalist who was showing like the body parts being sold, and there was like all this stuff happening. So PR had to get like up and going to help fix Planned Parenthood's image.
Now I'm kind of thinking maybe in the 80s and 90s, and maybe even, we just weren't like
No, probably not. Like if you weren't like a feminist in the 70s and 80s, this had not hit your home. Not the same way. Not the same way. Now, women in the 70s and 80s were still getting closet abortions. I mean, you'd have a 15-year-old get pregnant and the mom's like, we're taking you and we're not telling anybody, you're going to Planned Parenthood. Now it's like we've tried so hard to like propagandize it of its healthcare, trying to take away stigma from it. So shout your abortion is really popular now. So like women in the 70s and 80s, while it was right, you didn't talk about it as much.
You were ashamed of it.
Yeah, because there was still stigma to it.
That's the thing that was, I think, shocking seeing the real, was that it's just become
Destigmatized. And it's purposely becoming destigmatized. And you actually see the same trend with like AIDS. So when AIDS first happened, people would say things like, this is God's curse on people for anal sex, right? You'd see pretty severe statements about AIDS. One of the biggest pushes when they started talking about AIDS was to destigmatize it. But when you look at commercials with people with AIDS, you're looking at predominantly gay men and people of color because that's predominantly the communities that it was more prevalent. And again, you're advertising to your audience. Destigmatization has always been the goal for particular social movements that are not popular or are trying to become more popular. So again, the destigmatization of abortion is like really mainstream now. Shout your abortion is really popular. That's all on purpose. Yeah.
Say, right, modern, right now happening example of destigmatization is MAID, so medical assistance in dying. I don't know if you'd be willing to talk about it, but I think it is a pro-life issue as much as abortion.
Oh, 100%. I'm not as read on it, so I wouldn't talk about it too much right now, other than to say it is the same issue of placing value statements on people who are giving or are productive. So the qualifiers and functions is people at end of life are either not meeting or refuse to meet. So you've got, 25-year-olds who are wanting to end their lives now. And it's sort of this idea that we've moved away. Basically, I would undergird it as we've moved away from the philosophy that it is good to be alive. There is essence is, what is it? There's a thing. It's not essence. Existence is essence. There's another thing. No, it's to be alive is inherently the good, but there's a philosopher who says it a certain way.
So,
what does he say?
The greatest philosopher. Shakespeare's a guy to pick on, right? To be or not to be. That is the question. I'm like, no, you're an idiot. To be is good. It's literally what being means. There's a lot of philosophers that lean in that direction before the modernists threw in everything. But yes, being is seen as a good or a kind of perfection.
Yeah, to be
Perfection, we don't know what that means.
Is inherently good. But our culture doesn't believe that. So what you've seen now, so if you guys have done any of the worldview stuff, we started with you got Christian theism, which is the idea that we have intrinsic value and rights because we were created. So there's even more a God who knows us and sees us. Then you moved into deism. And it was you're created, but the God is distant, but you still have value in and of yourself because you are a created being. Then you're moving well out. So you're moving into modernism. You're moving into nihilism. There is no meaning, but because there's no meaning, you move into existentialism. Okay, well, there's no meaning. You have no purpose. You have no value. There is no God. Therefore, in existentialism, I will create my own meaning, which is only localized to this life. So it's I'm going to create my own meaning in money, sex, drugs, doing good for people. Sometimes it's humanitarian, sometimes it's not. Existentialism moves into postmodernism. So now you've got people who not only are life doesn't matter, you have no inherent meaning unless you make your own meaning. Then they're trying to reintegrate spirituality back on top of that. And so they're I want my cake and I want to eat it too. So I want to have purpose, but I want it to have more than just purpose in this nursing job that I have. I want to get in touch with the spiritual. So I'm going to start microdosing and start seeing a shaman when I take my yearly trip to India. So in postmodernism, you have moved so far away from this ideology that it is good to be alive because you were created by something that knows you and purposefully did it, and you have a purpose that goes beyond being a nurse, being a mom, being whatever. You have purpose, moving all the way into postmodernism, which is you have to make your own purpose, and you have to piecemeal that together as best as you can. And life doesn't really matter, and if someone just is not willing to create purpose for themselves, then why not just die, is really where you get. Does that kind of answer it a tiny bit?
Who were Canadian and from California.
Mm.
And
liberal epicenters.
yeah. And
Yeah, right. Next 4 hours of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were like, so why are people like pro-life in America, but also like pro-gun choice?
Pro-death. Oh, guns, not even like pro-death penalty, pro-guns. Oh, man. That's a big one. That's a good one. Huh?
You're on your own, figure it out.
Oh, I know the answer. Yeah, no, I know the answer. So what is abortion? It's the intentional ending of an unborn's life. What is gun ownership? It's the owning of a firearm that could when guns are outlawed. She was ready. So there's the first level of this is that there's a conflation, right? And the conflation is that abortion is equal to owning a gun ownership. Okay, now it's important. I don't have the numbers on me, but I can show you that the numbers for like successful abortions versus gun owners who have successfully killed someone, there's a huge difference in those numbers. On top of that, gun ownership is not for the explicit purpose normally of killing other humans, right? It could be killing food. It could be defending yourself against an intruder, which is not the same thing as murder. Does anybody know why?
Self-defense.
Because that person had ill intention towards you. It's different because you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if someone is encroaching on you and potentially encroaching on your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, you have a right to defend yourself, although the laws are getting weird about that now. It's kind of wild.
But you have a biblical.
Yeah, I do. I absolutely think so. And I think you have the right to protect and defend other people. Like my children, I can assure you, if someone comes to our door who is intent to hurt, Grant's going to kill him before he lets him kill our kids. That's fine with me. I can live with that.
I would argue you not only have a right, you have an obligation.
I agree. Now, a pacifist would disagree, and we can kind of get into the nuance of that, because like a pacifist would say, a Christian pacifist would say you should trust God so much that you're on it. So like the example, there's a thought experiment that they give. If you are in World War II Germany and you're hiding Jews, and a Nazi comes to your door and says, are you hiding Jews? And you are you do you have the duty to tell the truth or not? Or violate the commandment of like, thou shalt not lie, right? Do you know how you would answer that? Would you lie?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I think I first and foremost have a moral obligation to protect civil
Yeah.
or victims.
Yeah, so let me help you because you're right. We use the word lie incorrectly. So what that scripture is talking about is we don't bear false witness against our neighbor. So we're talking about it in like good faith when we're talking with people. So a pacifist would look at this and say, you should always tell the truth and you should always passively defend, but you should never take up arms. So I talked to a person who I gave this thought experiment to. He says, well, no, I'm not going to violate the commandment of lying, and I'm not going to fight with a gun. And so he's like, I'm going to trust God enough that if I told the truth, God could smite them dead where they stood. And I'm like, well, yeah, theoretically, but is that legitimately likely? No, God's probably not going to intervene in that way.
It's also not really very biblical.
Well, he thought it was, and he was a strict pacifist. So what I would say is, no, I'm absolutely like a person who has ill intention is not my neighbor who I have an obligation to bear correct witness to. And when it comes to like protecting, if I have to protect with force, I will. Now, maybe I have a gun with like rubber bullets so I can like stop them without like ending their life. Like, great. But like it is a right, I would argue. You do have a duty to protect others. God has entrusted us to do that. Yes.
So the part they were kind of trying to narrow down.
I know I got way off, sorry.
I like this discussion. Because, lots of people I'd like to have this discussion with. But like,
Yeah.
we kind of answered it with the triage, but they're like, gun ownership, you could also, it argue, it saves people.
Exactly.
But they also say like abortion can also save people like with the ectopic pregnancies and stuff, and like I don't know. But I'm like,
So what they're trying to, there's another conflation. So they're conflating that outlawing abortion, hold on, outlaws triage. Do you know why that doesn't work? Because they're not the same thing. So if we outlaw abortion 100%, do you think that doctors are going to send women with ectopics home to die? Of course not. If we outlaw elective abortions entirely, triage will always exist for women in crisis pregnancies. We do not need Planned Parenthood to save women in crisis pregnancies. That's such an easy one. It's just like a conflation on top of a conflation.
Another way to look at that would be triage did not come into the picture when Roe v. Wade was decided. Triage was happening before Roe v. Wade decision was made. People were saving
Yes.
women in ectopic pregnancies and even performing certain procedures that we would call abortive now. They were performing those procedures because of triage situations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, yeah, there's so many things that you could say, like with the gun ownership, like whatever. Like part of the problem with this is what people really want to do is they want to talk about another issue that bothers them, and they feel like they're the same thing because they both might involve death in some variety. But it's important for them to nuance out the difference between these two things. Bye, friends. That's very important. And we could go on and on about that, but gun ownership equaling abortion is a conflation. Outlawing abortion also outlaws like triage procedures for ectopics is a conflation. That's not true. Never will be. Never has been. Elective abortion is called elective abortion for a reason. It's elective. It is not a necessary procedure. They will never outlaw a necessary procedure that saves at least one life, that life usually being the mother, because the mother has to live for the fetus to live up to 24 weeks.
Can you pray and close us in prayer, and then anybody else that has any other questions, come up and talk to you, or they can stick around, just to, so if anybody feels like they want to speak out, but they can't speak out.
That's so true. Dear Jesus, thank you for this time together. Thank you for what is true and what is good and what is right, excellent, pure, honorable, praiseworthy. Lord, I pray that we would meditate on all of these things. I pray that we would come away more confident in our position. I pray that we would come away more understanding to those who do not see what we see or agree with what we agree with. Help us to understand that there is so much that can be done in just good conversations over time and planting seeds of thought. I pray that we would all be encouraged and invigorated to do lots of little steps over time with people to lead them into truth, goodness, righteousness, and ultimately to the gospel. Lord, we love you. We thank you for everything that you've given us. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen. Cool. Yes.
Thoughts on IVF?
Oh, dang. I didn't know if this was going to come up because that and chemical birth control are both kind of hard because they step on toes. IVF is ethically wrong.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I figured you did. I feel like you and I are kind of on the same wavelength of this. Who's familiar with what IVF is? Okay, cool. Who's not super familiar with what it is? Intergalactic Veterinarian Feeding Federation. Veterinarian Federation. IVF is in vitro fertilization, okay? So in vitro fertilization is the process in which, to some degree or another, you're going to remove eggs and sperm out of the people. You're going to unite them in like a test tube of sorts. You're going to do that a bunch of times. And you're going to implant lots of those into a woman with the hope and expectation that one of them implants into the uterine wall. So you're going to like stick it in there and hope that it implants. It is usually the case that like out of a bunch, I think they do like 12, but I actually can't remember the number of how many they do. They do quite a bit. And like out of that, you usually will get one. But it's also, interestingly, one of the reasons why IVF goes up like in twins and triplets is because you are literally shooting your shot like so much, more than normal. So why do you think I would say that IVF is ethically wrong based on even just what I just showed you? Anyone who's not a seasoned apologist. What is... See, and that's the thing is it's hard because you do... I always meet IVF babies.
Yeah, so I was my parents' fifth IVF attempt.
Wow.
And I explained to them, you sent a ton of humans to die. They reacted surprisingly well.
Yeah, I was about to say, yikes. You shouldn't be born.
Well, it was funny. They're like, that makes total
Think about it.
No, you don't know what you don't know.
Well, and IVF is actually like in the Christian circle, like has been very common for like a long time. Like I know a lot of Christians who do IVF, and it like just recently got popular in my sphere of the world because like Allie Beth Stuckey is really big on talking about this a lot now. So it's like really popular now to be talking about it. What?
I think it's just the Christian version of my body, my choice. It's like, so the left side.
Wait, no, I'm gonna get there.
Are you?
Yes.
We never talked about it. So.
What we're getting to is that we can play God and like create designer children because we have a right to make decisions that only God has a right to make.
Yes.
Yeah, I know where you're going because I love you.
I probably heard it from you.
Love your brain. Okay, the problem is you are sacrificing many other embryos in this process. And we would say an embryo is alive and human, right? It's been fertilized, it's alive and human. It feels a little different because you can't see them the same way because they're in a test tube and there's a lot of them, but that doesn't change what they are in their essential definition. So that's why this would be morally inconsistent with a pro-life position that an embryo is a human that's alive. Now, with that being said, there was something I was going to say about that. This is different than other procedures that I think are beneficial and actually like within Christians' rights to do. So up into what was called IUI, which is a different kind of procedure. So let's say that you are married and you're like trying to have a baby and it's becoming difficult to have a baby. One of the first things that you're going to do is you're going to stop doing it casually and you're probably going to start tracking your cycle more seriously, right? And then you're going to be having sex a few days before ovulation, like right before ovulation, on ovulation, after ovulation, like you're going to hit that 4-day window of like really trying to fertilize an egg. If that's not working, you'll maybe do the next step, which is you'll take a medication that increases your ovulation or increases his sperm count or whatever it is that you're doing to naturally aid a normal sexual process of a man and woman coming together to potentially create life, right? So you're still like using the means that God intended of a man and woman coming together in the act of sex. Unitive and procreative. That's the point, okay? If that's not working, I think the last appropriate step that a Christian could get behind is called IUI. And what happens in IUI is a man will ejaculate his sperm into a tube, and then they will immediately take that tube while it's still warm. They'll swirl it really fast to get the best swimmers all clean. They'll give them a little bath. And then they immediately chicken baster it of sorts. They will shoot it up.
Did you just say turkey baster?
Pretty much.
Okay.
They'll swirl it, and then he will inject the swimmers and say, off you go on the races. And the idea is that those sperm have a better chance of successfully implanting because you get the best ones and they're washed and there's like a whole thing. This is still the man and woman to a degree separated. This would not be something that would be like you would not want this to be your first step, but I think you could still argue in good faith that this is appropriate for Christians because it's still the man and the woman doing it. It's just one sperm and egg that they're working on fertilizing together in sort of an odd marital experience.
Is there a moral way to do IVF?
No.
Could there be?
I mean, if you went into IVF and was like, I want one embryo, but I don't think they'll do that because of how much you're paying. I mean, you're talking about thousands. Like, I know IUI is like $5,000 for like one go. So, and IVF is more.
Back, at least this is what my parents did. This was in the 90s. It was $20,000 for IVF.
So you're talking about $100,000 when you are an $100,000 baby.
Well, they also, the time it worked, they did the procedure incorrectly, so like it wasn't supposed to.
Oh, wow.
So they messed it
Would
up.
love it if you could talk about the eugenics of IVF and then also surrogacy.
Oh, God, surrogacy. Oh, so okay.
Eugenics first. That's way better.
Eugenics.
Do that one first.
So when you say eugenics of IVF, you're literally just wanting me to confirm to you that you are killing all of these other ones, or what do you mean, Claire? Oh, okay, yes, okay. So the problem with IVF that goes, yes, you're right. So the problem that goes beyond IVF, now most people who go into IVF go in with the idea of, I just want a baby. But what IVF actually opens the door up is if it's not what you want, you just start over.
You can look at the genetic markers
And be like, I don't want a boy. I don't want a blue-eyed. And actually, there's a documentary that I watched a long time ago where really wealthy people do exactly that. They'll go in for genetic markers and they'll be like, I want blue eyes, blonde hair, blah, 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 blah. If it's not likely, I try again. And so basically what this is basically us saying we have a right to design human beings, and if we don't like them, which our third category would then be don't like their genetic makeup, I can get rid of it. Where this really becomes an easy way to push people on this, because they might be like, who cares? I would say, okay, I'm a devout Christian, and this is not true, but let's just say I hate gay people, okay? And I'm very wealthy. So I'm going to get IVF, and for some reason I'm going to be able to genetically tell if my baby would be gay. I am absolutely going to abort that gay baby. What do you think that my opponent in that conversation is going to say? Heck no, you can't do that. That's unethical to abort the fetus because the fetus is gay, right? Then they have a problem with it. But 2 seconds earlier, if you're like, well, I want a blue-eyed baby, they're like, good for you, honey boo-boo. I want a blonde baby. Awesome, more power to you. And we've actually seen this kind of play out in a much more brutal form. So while it didn't happen like in utero, when you talk about the one-child policy, like how many of you guys are familiar with how many babies, like female babies, were left in markets to die? Like an astonishing, and how many women had forced abortions on them when their medic in the town found out they were pregnant. And actually there's a really good documentary on Prime about that. And 2 women are interviewed, and they were both abortion providers, and one of them now is a midwife to try and atone for her sins, and the other one is like doubled down on like, we did the right thing. I am glad I held women down and forced abortions on them. It's like, it's really hard to watch. It's a hard documentary to watch too, because one of them talks about like the babies that will cry in the marketplace until they die and nobody will touch them.
Also touching on eugenics and IVF, and also linking to the one-child policy, babies with special needs or babies with developmental disabilities or issues are also often discarded.
Absolutely.
In China, actually, their criteria, I have 2 brothers from China who would fit
Oh.
special needs criteria, which is actually
Broad.
quite broader than it is.
Let me guess, they're pretty normal, healthy kids.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
One of them was tongue-tied as a kid, the other one they thought had hydrocephalus because he was having febrile seizures.
One of them was tongue-tied. That kills me.
Tongue-tied, yeah.
Well, and how many times, honestly, we talk about this too, about like people getting abortions on misdiagnoses of issues. Like I just read about a couple who like got a wrong cerebral palsy, Down syndrome diagnosis aborted, and when it comes out, you can tell it doesn't have the chromosomal. Like you can tell by the eyes, and they knew.
Their child has trisomy 18, I think.
Yeah.
And then the baby
Comes out totally fine. Mike Adams, literally, he gave a debate about that, and he basically said, I have someone who lived. I want you to call him and tell him why they should have died. And then after, some guy came up and he's like, I'm trisomy 13. And he's like, no, you're not. And he's like, yeah, but every doctor said I was. And it's just, they can be wrong. Doctors can be wrong. And yes, you're getting into very dangerous ground anytime you start to play God and determine other people's quality of life, what is a valuable enough life to live, et cetera, yeah.
I want to push a little bit deeper on the philosophy side of this, since the few in the crowd remain. So a lot of the philosophy that you're going over, that you're saying you don't have to be a Christian to believe this. This is just philosophy. A lot of the moral undergirding of our even secular society is still Christian.
Yes.
We
steal.
That way. Right, so there's books on that, Frank Turek, Stealing from God. The one I have in mind is The Air We Breathe by Clint Scribner. That came out a couple of years ago. Very, very good. Not a very big read. Must read 2025, I would say. The Air We Breathe by Clint Scribner. Very, very good. And so one of the things that he wants to highlight in the book is he takes like the 8, what we would consider like modern Western virtues, right? And he goes over them, and what he's trying to demonstrate is those aren't, they didn't just like evolve Darwinian like out of society. Like they're Christian ideals that our society is now trying to separate from Christianity. So when even someone who's secular has moral outrage, like for example, I say in Rome, the child exposure rate, meaning the rate by which parents would conceive and then say, I don't like it, and then just leave it to die. The exposure rate in some situations was 30%. So they didn't have the kind of medicine that we have today, where it was easy. You carried it for 9 months, you gave birth, you said nope, and then you left it out. The Spartans did it, the Greeks did it, most ancient societies practiced it, and most people go, that's disgusting. Well, yeah.
Why?
Right, why? But better question is, what? Like today, we've just medically masked it, and so it feels cleaner. when you say my kid's gonna have Down syndrome, so just abort it.
Yeah.
It's the same.
Which is why,
thing.
like, Finland or whichever, like,
It's one of those Northern European countries.
yeah, we've eradicated Down syndrome. No, you've aborted them all.
Yeah, and so like it's medically masked exposure of children.
Yes.
That was being done by all of the former.
But those cultures had much more, like, they were totally fine saying they don't have value, I don't want them, and everyone's like, okay.
Yeah.
I guess we're actually just as flippant to say they don't have value, I don't want it. Yeah.
So the idea that we would consider all humans to be equally valuable, although our secular society currently agrees.
That's a Christian ideal.
That's a Christian ideal.
I agree, yeah.
So you would say that all humans are persons?
Yes.
Would you say all persons are also human?
Yep.
Then how is God one being, three persons?
Nice. So,
She got you.
oh, did she get me? How would you answer that, Grant? Tell me.
I would just leave the chat.
You're an
I'm
idiot.
just kidding. Go ahead. Just literally just walk out.
Okay. Okay, yeah, because I know there's an answer to this, but I'm trying to figure out how to explain it. Give me a minute. Let me think. That's a good question. Okay, so when we're defining person for us, right, we're talking about someone who's alive, and we're talking about someone who's human, okay? And we're talking about the status of having personhood in this culture. When we're talking about personhood and the status of the Trinity, my first inclination is to say that we're not talking about personhood in the same way. That's the first thing. Yeah, it's an analogous term, but I'm trying to decide how do I nuance this out? What?
We are persons because we are made in the image of God. And so God is personhood. And that's a derivative quality from him. So it's not as if personhood is defined by us and we projected that on God. God is what it means to be something that we would consider person, whatever that is. And he has communicated that to us.
But he's not human.
That doesn't matter. Like, so he didn't communicate that attribute to squirrels because they're not made in the image of God. He communicated it to his angelic host and to us. Jesus chose.
So, but you would say, so persons also qualifies angelic beings, and angelic beings are not material. They're spiritual. They're spiritual beings.
In the secular argument, right? We say alive and human, therefore it's a person, and that satisfies most conversation.
Right.
But you have really astute apologetic students.
Yes, you do.
Guys, hold on a second. I feel like there should be more involved here, and there is, because when we stop at just saying alive and human, we are sort of helping culture remove that virtue from Christianity for sake of argument, but it really does belong in the Christian biblical worldview. No other worldview can make sense of that. And so personhood really just means that you have been given your value for whatever you are by your creator. And so...
So would you just like replace Imago Dei?
Yes.
Like is a better way to explain it to a Christian?
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say alive at that point.
Yeah, just Imago Dei.
We treat our dead bodies with reverence.
Well, and we could even say your essence of who you are has moved. Right. It still exists. Your whatness still exists. Okay, that helps me. Yeah. Yeah, so if you're Imago Dei, then if we're talking about the philosophy of theology, right, you're getting rid of this. To be a person is to be Imago Dei. To be Imago Dei is to have the essence of humanness. You will always have the essence of humanness when you die and you're in the next, you're still who you are. You still have Imago Dei. You will still have humanness. You're still going to have material form at some point.
So the beauty of your argument, Lexi, is that it meets somebody where they're at. Mm-hmm. Like, all we need is alive and human. And if you try to add things to that, you end up with genocide potentially. Mm-hmm. And so,
but that's what I mean about these are not the same, because what we're talking about here is a theological concept. And what we're talking about here is like a legal terminology concept of who we give rights to.
And the reason it's a legal terminology right now is because our culture is trying to remove it from its theological context. And so your argument doesn't have to get into the theology to win the day. Yeah. Because you can meet them where they're at.
Cool. Did that answer that? That might not be super satisfactory, but that's the best I can do.
Can we circle back to surrogacy?
Oh, yes, surrogacy. Surrogacy is also wrong. I have issue with surrogacy. It's a little bit more, okay. Do I have an issue with surrogacy from a scientific standpoint? Not so much. Do I have an issue with surrogacy from a theological standpoint? Yes. So, for example, I don't think that secular pro-life, I don't think she has a problem with surrogacy, if I understand her correctly. You can, but I don't think she does. And so I think the question is what you define as selfish, what you define as a right. Do you have a right to put your baby into somebody else's body? Because the issue that people who are not theological, so let's say I'm secular, right? Let's say I'm an atheist and I have a problem with surrogacy. The reason that I have a problem with surrogacy, 99% chance, is because I think that we're going to exploit poor women with surrogacy. That's the atheist woman's problem with surrogacy, is what's going to end up happening is you're going to outsource, if you're a celebrity and you have money, or you're anyone who has money and influence, you're going to outsource birthing to poor women and exploit them in that way. Yes. It's 100%, right. So another issue with surrogacy is there is a biological reality. Now we need to be careful about that because then we can inherently potentially shame adoptive families. But it is true, biologically.
Choice. It's different.
No. But I'm saying the reality is when a child is separated from biological mother, there are biological realities of that's not best case for baby. That's a true thing, because of the way that my hormones match that baby's rhythms and cycles, the fact that my hippocampus opens to that sound of that baby, the fact that I lactate for that baby, the fact that I experience which hormone when they latch? Oxytocin to a humongous degree. Like, there is a lot of reciprocity between biological mom and baby that surrogacy is not going to have the same.
I would also say, so I have a family friend who's adopted an embryo, and that child actually looks more like her than her biological children.
Fascinating.
I would argue that part of that's because there's a large factor of epigenetics at play, which we don't completely understand the heritability of.
Interesting. Now so here's the thing that I'm still chewing on with this, with a theological standpoint of like differentiating between surrogacy and actually could it be a good thing for Christian women to adopt IVF embryos? So like one of the things that's been considered and talked about is like, is it actually a moral good for Christian women to save embryos that are frozen? And the only possible way to do that is to surrogate for them. I guess there's no better word for it, right? To implant them and birth them because they are human and alive, but they need gestation. And so there's sort of a dilemma in this conversation that allows you have to kind of nuance. Like if you're a Christian, how do you feel about, like, could that be a good thing or bad? Is it always wrong to surrogacy, or is there like an instance where you're like literally saving an IVF embryo that it could be good? When you're in the secular world, like you said, it's more about how it affects the baby or the mother or both, and how it exploits women who are doing the work. And again, it comes back to designer, it comes back to this idea. And really, the undergirding of this, as a Christian looking outside, the reason that these kinds of things exist is because our culture is getting more and more selfish and bent in on itself. We've probably always been selfish and bent in on ourselves, but the way that it manifests right now is through this idea that like we never want to do hard things. And so even outsourcing things like babies is like what we do. Like the fact that we have so much like dual income, no kids. Like it's a selfish culture, this idea of live for yourself, do what's best for your body. If this child's gonna make your breasts sag and your belly wide, you shouldn't do that to your body. There's an inherent selfishness in our culture that has made this possible. Oh yeah.
What would you say if it's like circumstantial though for someone to say that like they physically are incapable of carrying their own child?
Right.
And they have a close friend or family member that is wanting to take care of the child for them? Where does the morality come in with that?
Yeah, so the argument a Christian would make, like Allie Beth Stuckey, for example, would say that we're playing God in that situation where God has not allowed. So like we're taking something into our own hands that like takes children out of the realm of a man and woman having unitive and procreative sex with the potential of children. Like that's procreative is a potential of sex. It's not a right or a guarantee. And so with that, when people start to look to surrogacy, what they're saying is I have a right to a child, but what that turns the child into, and this is important to understand, it turns the child into a commodity.
Wouldn't that make IUI playing God in a way?
Because it's the same man and woman's sperm and egg, and you're just cleaning the sperm and then implanting it? No. It's just like if you had like a weird sexual encounter. So instead of just having like unitive sex, you like are in the room together and he puts it in a different way. It's weird, but when you really nuance it out, it's the same pieces and the same couple and the same biological information coming together. The problem with surrogacy, which is kind of like an undergirding, like with the selfishness, is we turn children into a commodity or a product that we can create and that we deserve. And so that's what's so interesting about like the Bible when it talks about infertility. It talks about it as a curse. But what does every person who experiences infertility do wrong? They get a mistress, which is or a concubine, which is very similar to surrogacy in some ways. It's the idea of, I can't impregnate this person that I'm unitive and procreative with, I'll go do it somewhere else. And I would say that that's crossing a line that God did not intend. But we should mourn infertility. It's really sad, it's awful. But we don't want to turn children into commodities either. And surrogacy and outsourcing does that. So.
Okay, so we're doing this from the perspective of someone who wants to completely follow the laws of God, like as a Christian. So we agree that abortion is killing a baby, and that's at all stages. So then I know there's some laws in Leviticus, maybe, about
Okay.
this, or Deuteronomy, but where does birth control come into play?
Yeah, so I would not be looking into the Old Testament for birth control advice, so you can just totally like leave that aside and don't even have to worry about that. You just need to be answering the question of like, what is abortion, what is a fetus, and what is the thing inside of me doing to those two things, right? So birth control that I think, okay, so if you're a Catholic, because of your theological bent, you're going to say that you should never prevent, okay? I'm a Protestant, I do not take that position, okay? I do think that there are appropriate ways to prevent, okay, that are not like infringing upon God and what he's accomplished. I think that he gave us an intimate knowledge of our cycle and of how sex works in a marriage for us to be able to have children well, okay? So things that I think you can make a quick, easy case that are appropriate would be condoms, right? Would be, I would not rest your future on pulling out, but it's a thing. I wouldn't say that's a healthy thing for a marriage, but if you are just like bent on preventing, we can talk about means that would be better. Things that you need to be very careful in considering would be any kind of insert. So any kind of, why am I blanking on the name of these? IUDs, thank you. Any kind of IUDs that would go in for months or years. Not only would I say that you should be careful with them because of the like what they're putting into your body that could affect the fetus, but also just because what you put into your body, it actually is really bad. And the more research that comes out, the more like super feminist atheists and super Christian women are both like, these are bad, but for different reasons. So like the super atheist feminist is like, this is bad for your body, force men to be on birth control. That's like their solution. And Christians are like, this is bad for your body, have sex within marriage, and kids might happen, right? There's like two of them are recognizing the problem with two different solutions, which is that IUDs are really bad for your body, really bad for your hormones, really bad for your mental health. The research is wild. It freaks me out because I was on hormonal birth control for like 8 years, and I can assure you that led to problems in my life. Like I know that had issues in my life, okay? So with that being said, not only IUIs, I would be very aware if you are taking a hormonal birth control of what it is and what it does, because what a lot of people don't realize is that hormonal birth control, some of them, a lot of them, have the potential to work like a morning after pill, because they are made up of the same thing. They're supposed to be preventative, but they're not always. Sometimes they are post implantation, and people don't always know that. And so one of the things that I've actually had to like grapple with in my world is realizing that like I was sexually active on a hormonal birth control for a few years in marriage, and there is a really serious potential that there was an abortive experience that I don't know about. And like I have to reckon with that. That might be like have happened. But I didn't know at the time. So again, there are means that I think like the best means would be counting, right? That's like the most, through history, women who are much more in tune with their cycle. I think the reason we're so out of tune is because we're like 3 generations out of second wave feminism, and no women talks to women about their bodies because they're all at work and they're leaving their children in school systems. I'm just gonna go full crazy. Women aren't talking about this kind of stuff. So like moms who are trying to help don't even know like how to talk about like what you should be eating or your postpartum or your hormones because they don't know because their mom didn't teach them, because the Industrial Revolution happened and then all of a sudden all the women are like out in the home and everything changed. It's crazy. And we're not experiencing birth all around us all the time like cultures and communities were for thousands of years. So we're so out of the loop of it. So anyway, counting is very effective. People have been doing it forever, especially if your cycle is normal. And if you're not on hormonal birth control, for the most part, your cycle should be kind of normal. You also can pee on a stick, and your stick will tell you if you're ovulating. It'll give you your pH levels. You can know if you're ovulating and when to be careful and when to not be careful. I have a friend who has it down to a science. It's hilarious. She like lives and dies by her chart. Okay, but if you're not comfortable with that, you can consider, like I said, condoms. Pulling out. Would not put your money on those. I wouldn't recommend them. I don't think they're good for marriages. But again, you can count, and that's a way that you can like actually be sure when you're doing this that like you're not feeling guilty or like what if, you know what I mean? You're not like doing something that you might regret if you're feeling, convicted about it. If there's a woman who's talking to me in my church and is like really gung-ho about getting married but like doesn't want to have kids and is like on hormonal birth control, I'm going to be having some conversations with her about the way in which she views marriage, children, and what she's putting in her body. Because I do think that like we should be talking about it. So that's a really good question. And if you're not sexually active, which none of you are married, so none except for our back row squatters over here, and all of you are men. But for all the women here, like you should feel easy that you don't have to worry about it right now. And if you're on hormonal birth control for like another reason, I would just do a little bit of research on if that's actually helping you, because I got on it at 16, not because I was sexually active, but because I was having an irregular period, and they're like, get on hormonal birth control. I wish I had not done that. I wish that my mom had advocated differently, but she also didn't know, and she was trying to help me. So, you live and you learn. But
It's not my wife, but it is kind of crazy, like a girl has any sort of lady problem where
anything.
Just shut down her whole endocrine system.
Anything.
Turn the whole thing off.
Anything.
Keeps it off for like a decade. And it's kind of crazy that's the solution.
It is. It is. And it's more crazy. And it's more crazy because we actually, the more we understand as we're relearning what we already knew, women are ruled by their hormonal cycle. Everything that you do revolves around your hormonal cycle. And that's like a good thing. God made you that way. It's like
empowered by their.
Yeah, no, but I mean like your life is in cycles, and the cycles are faster, and that's normal, and it's healthy, and it's good for you. And when you're like me and you get on a hormonal birth control and you don't have a period for 8 years, it affects you. Yeah. It affects, literally there's research about how it affects like the pheromones that you're attracted to in men. It affects the way you eat, breakouts, gaining weight. Like there are so many things that it affects.
I'm sorry. If someone had a question, I came home one day and she was watching some lecture, academic treatment on one of these issues, and I walk in, whatever, at the end of the day, and the lady was like, was it the Sylvia? I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about the birth control, and because you just mentioned pheromones and what you're attracted to, and they did a double-blind study on women who were on it versus women who were not, and women who were on it were attracted to men who were more feminine in their physical characteristics versus women who were not on it, and I was just like,
how did that make you feel, Grant?
She was on it.
How does that make you feel, baby?
You're going out of that.
Yeah.
I have 2 statements and then a question.
Yes.
I love how open you are about this, because I think in a lot of Christian circles, women do not talk about this.
Yeah.
They should, in my opinion.
Oh, I agree.
I'm a very blunt person.
Which I love about you already.
That does not come out in worldview.
Yeah, you did great.
Stuff it down.
Yeah, you did great.
have looked at me a few times while I'm talking to people.
He's like, tone it down.
He'll say something and he'll look at me like,
He said, tone it down.
I'm not realizing I'm that.
my other statement is, I have personal, like, I have PCOS.
Yeah.
Which is very, very common.
Yeah.
Especially in women today due to endocrine blockers.
Yes.
But also, like, issues like that, like
Mhm.
PCOS or endometriosis,
Mhm.
which is also common.
Yep.
They prescribe birth control as a way of masking symptoms.
Yes.
Actually dealing with
Not alleviating the actual problem.
And so I encourage all the ladies here, please do research.
Yes.
Because I did a butt ton and praise the Lord that I didn't go on birth control because I think it would have caused lots of issues. So if you are on it, just look into it, and different kinds are worse than others.
Yes.
Genuinely, like, recommend doing your research.
Yes.
But also, my question for you was, what would you say to people who think, okay, you're a Christian, you're taking all the fun out of sex, like you're mechanicalizing it, you're
Yeah,
making
sure.
it perfunctory.
Right. So I think the first thing that I would say as like a Christian who's been having sex for like 9 years is like, I find it very fun. But on a more serious note than that, right, like, and that's kind of, I mean that kind of in jest. I know that that's silly. It's just, people say silly things, but no. So again, I think it's important to understand that like if we were playing a soccer game, if we went out to play soccer, right? Let's say, how many people are on a soccer team? Okay, let's say we had a full team for a soccer team and they go out on the field and the person out there is like, no rules, do whatever you want, have fun playing the soccer game. How many people would be frustrated pretty quickly? Why?
Because you can't play foot game without the rules.
Right,
Soccer.
because the boundaries actually, counter to everyone saying boundaries equal, prison, the boundaries are what create the fun of the game. Right? Because it gives you something to work towards, it gives you a purpose, it gives you a common united thing. Like, it's good to have boundaries and rules. That applies to so many things in life. Sex is also one of those things, and I know that to be true because if you look at the natural law, the things that God hates are things that hurt us. So when we talk about fornication, which is literally just premarital sex, what you are, bringing into the game with fornication is potential like child out of wedlock, which is bad for the child, bad for the nuclear family, bad for the female, bad for the man, bad for everyone, for like a million reasons. And all of us can be like, yeah, single parenthood, right? Moms without fathers, all the rates of like how children do worse in those settings, right? Fornication is one of the reasons that happens, right? If we're talking about sex with 2 men or 2 women, you're talking about you're not having a procreative act, you're not creating a population that can like forward society, you're not creating a nuclear family, you're taking what God meant to build and you're using it for like not its full intended purpose, and we would even say to the degradation of its purpose. I would argue it's like a mockery of what God like intended, and that's like a whole nother conversation. But anything that God boundaries with sex, he's literally doing for our flourishing. And if we actually believe that he's good and we actually believe that he loves us and we actually think that he knows better than we do because he made us, we can trust him. So like when I take a knife, if I decided to brush my teeth with it tonight, could I? Yeah, I theoretically could I. Would it be the best choice for me? No, or my teeth. No, it would be a bad choice. It would be a misuse of a thing. Okay, so sex is very easily a misused thing, all right? And people like to try and make it seem like a misused thing can be fun in its misuse, which is what our culture has been literally propagandizing forever. So they look at it and they're like, porn is fun, it doesn't hurt anybody, it's not a big deal. And then you get a man who's married who can't perform with his wife because it's not stimulating enough while he's thinking about somebody else. That is an issue. And that is an issue because they have taken literally their neurological wiring that God intended to be created in a marital bed for one person, which every statistic that you read talks about people who are sexually active for long periods of time are more satisfied sexually than people who are not. There's a lot of studies on that because you know the person in their tics and and there's communication and it's open and it's more comfortable and honest because it's not a stranger. There's just like vulnerability helps because God made us that way. Okay, so you take all that out of it, you're trying to say, oh, it's so fun, it doesn't hurt anybody. It does. God's giving us boundaries for our benefit. And that's like we see the real implications of that now, like little girls who are more willing to give blowjobs than kissing boys because they've been so pornified. And we're like, our whole culture's like, it's fun, it's fine. It's not. It's not. It's better when that girl grows up, marries a man who says, I'm faithful, and I will know you and your body, and when it changes, I will love it, and when it bears children, I will love it, and when it's old, I will love it, and when I can't have sex, I will care for it, and then we'll die. That is better. And that's why people like lament old romances that they watch of like in black and white, and then they're like, why can't we have that today? Well, because we've killed it. Because our sexual culture like has killed like actual romance and actual like, oh, anyway, sorry, that's like, that's such a tangent I have.
I love that take.
Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate your answers.
Yeah.
I really, really love what you said about boundaries, like limiting creates a better environment.
Yes.
And I often think, I think we see it reflected in our Constitution, especially, our moral Christian law, licentiousness versus liberty.
Mm-hmm.
Licentiousness is taking, everything like is permissible. I can do
Yeah.
anything I want. And Scripture even says everything's permissible.
But not everything's beneficial. Exactly.
And so we're on the same wavelength.
Keep going.
Liberty, I think, is within the confines of what is good and moral
Yes.
and productive for human flourishing. Which
Yeah.
I think is exactly what God gives us in the sexual marital relationship.
Yeah, and you can like when you're trying to talk to someone about this, like even bringing in examples of like when the Romans would party, they would like, I think it was the Romans, they would like eat until they vomit and then would go eat some more. And the idea was like that was fun and fulfilling. And we would look at that as like, no, that's an overindulgence. That's like you could do it, but it's not good for you to do it. The same thing is true with sex. And so like Grant and I have been talking about this a lot right now, like with our kids, like who will start to ask questions and get older and explore their bodies and like be exposed to things with other children. And there's a real consideration of the way in which we talk about sex where we need to be careful because, you kind of have this like purity culture, which I'm not saying purity is bad, purity is great. But there was like a thing about purity culture where it was almost like sex is ugly, then you're married, go have fun. And you're like, well, I've been like last 20 years, I've been told like sex is ugly and weird and gross. And now all of a sudden I'm supposed to enjoy it, I don't understand. So we have to be very careful with our kids in an appropriate and age-appropriate manner, explaining that like God created sex for good, but there's boundaries for it for your benefit. So like for our son, our hope, we always talk about as parents, like if we can get our son to his wedding day without like, let alone a vicious addiction to pornography, having seen anything like illicitly pornographic, if we can get him to his wedding day without having seen anything illicitly pornographic and able to literally create his neurobiology to his wife over that first couple years and then onward, we will have felt like the most successful parents in terms of what we have like kept him from. And we feel really strongly about this because of our testimonies and how much people don't really know about how like easy and accessible ruining your sexual future is with your, what you're exposed to. So with all that to be said, like we're going to try really hard with Elliot to even like explain like how these boundaries are going to prosper him and prosper his wife and prosper his children, and that it's worth waiting for something good, which would be a really healthy, happy, and fulfilling sex life. And I can assure you, every person I've talked to who waits until marriage and has a really beautiful and fulfilling sex life sounds better when they talk about it than vicious porn addicts or like detransitioning people. Literally, I just read a book about detransitioning people who are the least sexually active of anyone, even though they seem the most like sexually aware, because they're so uncomfortable in their bodies, they don't want anyone to see them. It's like a fascinating reality of the people who tout sex the loudest seem to be the most unhappy with it. So.
What do you think about how the church has handled limited pornography? And also, furthermore, have you read Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski?
No, I am not familiar with that.
I highly recommend that book.
Oh, okay.
Because it talks about, she's a sexologist and she's very secular, so a lot of what she says I live those.
Oh, but still, I love that. I would be really interested.
She's incredibly knowledgeable about female sexual health and sexual
Write it down for me, please. Please.
But my main question is, I've struggled with porn.
Mm-hmm.
I did growing up, I was exposed very young, at like the age of 3.
Very young.
Very young.
Jeez.
And I know I've spoken to almost every woman in my like friend group growing up in high school.
Yeah.
Was watching porn.
Yeah.
Engaging in
Yeah.
pornographic activities.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the church never talks about it.
So are you familiar with Fight the New Drug? Okay, that would be my first step, is get familiar with Fight the New Drug, because it talks a lot about like addiction and like the neurological hardwiring of it, and also the statistics of male to female usership of pornography, and how to like unwire basically if you find yourself in an addiction space. So I'll speak for myself and not for my husband, but like I also like had a stint with pornography, but I was 12. I was much older, and it was brief. It was a couple years. When I got saved, it was done, and it still impacted. And we can talk about that in private to anyone who's curious. But it did impact my life moving forward. It doesn't just go away because your neuron wiring, your neuroanatomy changes over those 2 years, even just 2 years, but let alone many years. So with that, I think the church had a problem because you had boomers, right? And a boomer who wanted pornography had to drive to a store and purchase it face to face with a clerk, and there was a lot of shame involved. So like you either had to really want it or you had to really hide it to get it, right? Then you're moving into Gen X, and so you're still kind of having to go and get it. Maybe you can find it in your dad's cubby if he's got a Playboy hiding somewhere, but it's still something you're physically grabbing, finding. You're not talking about viewing things very quickly. You're looking through like still pictures. There is even a difference in that. But then you're moving into, so when I was a middle schooler, internet was introduced on the phone, right? So you already have the internet and you already have pornographic websites that are existing. So now people can lie about being 18 and they can get in and they can watch sex happen, right? Now they're not just watching real sex, they're watching a lot of it is fake or rape or whatever. It's not real, it's dramatized, it's a moneymaker. It explodes. Now at my middle school age, you have a phone that can access the internet. Now all of a sudden, you don't even need to be on your family computer to access it. You can lie and say that you're 18 on a personal cellular device anywhere in the house, anywhere outside of the house, anywhere in the world, right? So the church, I think, didn't do a poor job because they didn't want to do a good job. I think they did not understand, who was in leadership, did not understand how accessible it was and how quickly it changed. Because up until millennials, who now kind of understand how fast things change with social media, you had people who things were changing socially very slowly and very easy to keep up with. But now as a millennial, I understand, I don't even know, when we talk to Gen Alphas, I don't even know what the heck they're talking about. I can't keep up with the social media, I can't keep up with the lingo, and I'm 30. How much more so for people who were in leadership when I was a kid who were not able to keep up with what was happening and how accessible and easy it is. So now do I think the church is doing a better job? Yes. The rates of women viewing porn are going up. It's like in the high 70s now. Men are in the high 90s, regardless of Christian affiliation or not, which is really terrifying. But we should be talking about it, and we should be talking about how women not only read fantasy novels, but like it is often a gateway to other things, but like women will just watch porn because it's literally meant to addict your brain. Like it's meant to be stimulating and appealing. It's meant to be watched. It's the same thing with scrolling social media reels. It's literally meant to draw you in. And so like women are not like kept from that. Like women are equally vulnerable to that. And so yeah, we need to be talking about it a lot. We need to be very honest about it. Like in a room of adults, I wouldn't be doing this with my 5-year-old. But we need to be honest about it, and we need to be like really clear about how serious it is and how much it affects like our life. But the beauty of it is actually deprogrammable. We are able to overcome. It is, and it changes. And so
a really good book there is a book called Wired for Intimacy by a guy named William Struthers, neuroscientist, and he goes into that. I think his intent is to write it toward guys.
Yeah, right.
But anybody can read it.
Right.
That's a really, really good one. A shorter version, not by him, but it's by Covenant Eyes, is an app that's establishes a VPN on your device and basically monitors you. It blocks content and then takes screenshots of content that the algorithm consists, whatever's explicit, and then will produce a folder each week and send it to your accountability partner. Covenant Eyes is a great program.
yeah.
But Covenant Eyes has a PDF called The Porn Circuit, and it's like, I don't know, 16 pages, whereas if you're going to read something, you might as well just read Wired for Intimacy. But the PDF, the Porn Circuit's obviously much smaller.
Well, and this is why Grant and I are really serious about like a couple things is like, internet blockers, like even for adults, but especially for kids. Like if you know that you are not even an addict, but if you know that you can't control yourself without help, you get blockers. And even more, you get accountability. Like Grant and I are in accountability every week. We're in it for like all things, not just this issue, but like accountability. Like the reason I can talk about this so openly is because unless it's drawn into light, you're still like captive to it, right? But when it's out in the light, if it's exposed, right, you're not captive to it anymore. It doesn't have that power over you anymore. Like it requires it getting all out into light. And so we need to be, as a church, a place where people can find accountability, getting things out into light, being honest and open about it. And we, people who have struggled, need to be communicating to younger people how it negatively affects you in ways that resonate with them so that they're unwilling to do it. Like, I want my kid to look at pornography as awful because of what it's going to do to him, more than he's curious to look at it because of what it'll make him feel. I want him to understand, like, the danger of it, right? Yeah. Like drinking sunflower oil for no reason.
Kind of going to like the accessibility of privacy achievement, I had an experience where I was in 6th grade, and I don't know if you ever heard of Study Island. It's like an academic website, and I put it in, and I had the URL 1 digit off, and it was hundreds and hundreds of images.
Yeah.
It happened twice.
Yeah.
And that was with school firewalls.
Yeah, see, now that's the thing, too, is I was introduced to it because of an ad that popped up on my computer. I wasn't looking for it, but it was, like, arousing enough to keep it up. But the problem with that is, like, as a Christian who's looking at it in my perspective, not only is it, like, easy to get around, I really believe that Satan has, like, absolutely put it in people's path as much as possible because it is a really easy way to stumble people. It is a really easy way to captivate people. It is a really easy way to like cause a whole lot of destruction. So I like don't even like feel weird or spoopy saying like, I think that was put in your path as like a terrible thing. Like,
God was over me. I had a friend right beside me who shoved the computer
thank God.
out of my way and took it to the teacher before I could barely even see anything.
Like, thank God for that. Yeah, and like thank God for like, you know, I got caught. Now I got sneakier when I got caught, but I got saved and that changed a lot for my life, thank God. Huh? Can't hide from God. And like, you know, that's the thing, you get saved and you're like, no, you're like, this is wrong, I shouldn't be doing this. Like, you just, you know, and so yeah, dragging it out into light and like being known by people.
But even if it's as accessible as this type of a school.
Oh, it's horrifying. The fact that I was looking up a GIF the other day, a GIF, whatever, on my texts, and I had an illicit image of a woman, and I'm like, my son could be next to me, and I'm typing on my phone, and this just pops up. What in the world? I feel like I can't have anything that isn't.
Album covers.
Oh, there was an album that Grant's high schoolers were talking about because it won some award, and then it popped up on my Spotify, and it was an actual pornographic image with like a little like square around the part that would be, you know, censored, but the rest of it was like a pornographic image, and I'm like,
On our Apple TV.
I can't believe this is on Spotify. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. Yeah, I was shocked. So yeah, no, I think that our culture, I mean, it's hard. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. Our church has to be like, the church has never been good about being on the front lines of some of these things, but the church is going to have to do its best to be on the front lines of these things.